The Spookiest Story Never Told, Part 5, with Marty Garza. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent Podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent Podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science, where we are nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau. Kyle's already cracking a beer because it's late.
We've already been in here for 2 hours.
We've completely revamped the studio again. And as always, because we're really busy every other time, Kyle does all the setup right before we record.
Hey, not all the setup. I worked on it for a couple of days, but
That's true. That's true.
But I can only really do it, especially if we have a guest on Zoom, which we have today. Marty, thanks for being here, first of all.
Thanks for being here, Marty, for 2 hours already.
Yeah, helping me out. I'm like, I
back.
need you here so I can make sure I get this routed correctly. And yeah, we've been in here for a while. But Marty had his own problems.
He did. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess we owe the listeners a little bit of explanation because I'm sure there was a little bit of confusion on what all transpired and why there was so, seemingly it took a long time to get the last episode out. And the reality is that there was actually almost 2 months between recording of part A or part 13, depending on your, and this one, which is either part B or 14, depending on how you want to.
Part 5, 14.
So just a little, I guess I'll explain a little bit as much as I can quickly. Some of you that, watched the video version of the last episode, you might have noticed the credits at the end running, and then you might, frequent viewers might have noticed that I looked really out of it. Like my eyes looked halfway shut. I looked like I hadn't slept in weeks, and that's because I hadn't. I lost 3 members of my family, including my mother, right when we were about to record initially, and we pushed it back a little bit. And so obviously I'd worked on this thing for so long and I wanted to get it out. And then we kept getting messages, hey, when's the next episode coming out? So I felt like obligated we needed to get this thing out. And so we recorded that episode thinking that we could, and initially it was going to be one thing that I knew it was long. Yeah, it never is, right?
Going to be one episode.
Right. So we elected, we made the executive decision on the fly to split it into 2 episodes, which I think was better anyway. Allowed us more time to discuss, certain aspects of it. But then life gets in the way, and the bros had the Cosmic Summit to do, and then things just seemed to be getting in the way of getting. We kept scheduling, and then
you were out of town. You went out of town for 2 weeks, and we were out of town.
And a lot of arrangements and things that I had to take care of in the interim. And then the day before we were going to record the second part, my wife and I were involved in a head-on collision. And I was in the hospital for a few days and had to have surgery. And so now I'm like pretty much out of commission for a while. Fortunately, it was all done ahead of time because I'm relegated to one finger typing now. So that's a little bit of a hindrance when you spend 8 hours a day on your computer typing.
Just use AI.
My life. Everybody keeps telling me that, and my brain, it's like I work on automatic writing or something because I have a hard time. As you can tell, I have a hard time speaking. I'm a lot better at typing than I am at speaking. So that's just to catch everybody up. It's so the previous part A or the previous episode actually was recorded almost 2 months ago. So now we can move on and finish out our story.
Yeah, and I have a couple things to add too. This is going to be the last episode we record before harvest. So we're taking our annual harvest break after this episode, which can be a month, maybe 6 weeks. It depends. This harvest is weird. It's like getting off to a sluggish start, but we'll see. We may be able to record, if we have time, we may be able to record an episode in between harvesting the whites and the reds. We don't know. But this will be the last one until after harvest, look for the next episode after this one in September, probably. Because most of August is usually taken up with harvesting the grapes and then doing the primary fermentation. Another thing I wanted to mention too is I wanted to give a shout out to Louis Brandner. He was an admin in our Discord and an active member there for a long time. He went by the name of What Are You Snaking a Beat? And he passed away as well. We found out. I mean, he just, people sometimes take breaks from their online presence, their social media or whatever, and he had been gone for a couple of months. And then every once in a while, some of the admins in the Discord will sort of do a wellness check. They'll reach out to people, and if they don't respond, they start trying to figure out if everything is okay. And we found out that Lewis had passed away in February. So I wanted to give a shout out to him. Thanks for being a part of the Snake Bros family and the Snake Force in the Discord. And you'll be missed, brother. You really will. One other thing I noticed. So for people that are new, maybe to the podcast or maybe to just Marty's UFO stuff, some people are wondering, like, when are we going to get some answers? When is Marty going to tell us what's going on? And I just want to say, like, that's never been our approach on this podcast, and that's certainly not Marty's approach with this subject. The way he's approaching this subject is he's not going to sit you down and tell you, here's what's going on. He's laying out a whole bunch of details. All of this information that he's putting out is all publicly available elsewhere. It's in books. He's pulling it from multiple different sources. Part of it is his own long-time interest in the subject, and how he's been absorbing this information for decades, right? And he's been putting together these concepts in his head, and doing these episodes with us has allowed him to sort of flesh all that out and really put it down into words. And that's what we're going through on the show. So when we go through this, what he's trying to give you is stuff to think about in the context of the UFO subject, plus probably a lot of the other subjects that we tackle on this podcast: ancient mysteries, cosmology, some stuff about physics, some things on the edge of our current science. So it's never going to be answers. It's always going to be, kind of look at this fact and think about it, and then look at these other ones, and do they connect or not? And does this tell us a story or not? That's really what Marty's doing here, and that's what we have always done on this show. So if you're here for answers, you're at the wrong place. Just letting you know. Yeah,
I can add a little bit to that and say it's interesting that you brought that up, because I think, it's important to understand that what I'm trying to get or to achieve here is I'm trying to get people to open their minds and think about these things rather than telling you what to think about it, which is the way it is typically done. And I always tell everybody, as soon as somebody tells you they have it figured out is when they're lying.
Yeah.
That would be the PG or the G version of what I'm really thinking. In other words, and we had a little bit of this discussion on the Discord recently, and I used kind of this makeshift analogy, and I said I told the guys, I said, the UFO phenomenon is like a fun house. It's literally everything there, virtually everything in there is designed as purposeful misdirection, and what isn't is typically a distortion of your own reflection. So rather than rushing to the first most obvious exit, I just understand that's probably the last one you should be looking at. That's drawing your attention away from things that are probably more subtle, but more meaningful. And so I think that if you study UFO books, not typical nuts and bolts books, I don't think you're ever going to I don't think there's any chance of figuring it out. I think this is going to take a broad spectrum approach where you have to consider all these pieces that may or may not be relevant. But I think they give you a better overall perspective. And if nothing else, I think we're learning more about ourselves, more about, the human condition, but what is our purpose? I think that we are up against a mechanism that was purposefully engineered to confound mankind. I think it's not, and this is, I guess I'm touching on things that we're going to be discussing in other episodes, but
yeah, but that's great.
I think the idea that people say, oh, I caught a glimpse of a being, or I caught a glimpse of a craft, or, like if you surprised it somehow, like it wasn't meant to be seen, but you caught a glimpse of it, they've already got you fooled.
Yeah.
I think everything is purposeful. I think everything and these encounters, I think, are tailored to the individual. And we've covered that many times on the podcast, of how there can be people that have a shared experience side by side and interpret it in completely different ways, and not just descriptive, but in terms of time and all sorts of things. Like, these things are much more fundamental than just physical, very analog type experiences. I think that there's a lot more going on. And I think that if you read between the lines and understand that almost everything that I write is on 2 or 3 levels purposeful, I'm trying to get you to like consider different possibilities within each thing, rather than tell you, oh, look here, this is how this was interpreted. And no, I'm trying to give you, I word things in such a way that allow you to kind of pick them apart and maybe look at the, Kyle's really good at that. Like something will be read, and then Kyle will say, hey, yeah, but what if that meant this? And that's exactly what I want. In other words, don't take things at face value. Understand that there's a lot of complexity to this. And I think as soon as we start to recognize that and open our eyes and our minds to like infinite possibilities, I think we stand a much better chance of maybe not fully understanding the phenomena, but at least starting to work towards at least an understanding of how it's interacting with us. Or, I don't know if we'll ever understand the purpose, but maybe that's, in this episode, we're going to give you one potential explanation. It's by no means the only explanation, but it's one of the oldest ones, I would say.
Yeah.
So with that, I guess we can.
I'd also tell people, like, and you can kind of tell from what Marty was just saying, like, I don't think Marty is like holding answers back from us. That's the other thing, is people are like, why won't he just tell us what he thinks? He is doing that. And the thing about this subject is that none of us know what to think, really. And so, like, all you can do is continue to study. And sometimes you find things that change the idea a little bit, but it's not like he's got all these answers and he's keeping them secret.
Yeah, but he's got this grin when you ask a question and he doesn't answer it, that you're like, I know you know the answer to that question.
I think he's grinning because he's glad you asked it.
Yeah, I think that's because
you're right.
You're
glad grin versus secret grin.
Secret grin.
When you ask the right questions, a lot of times I'll grin because you're asking something relevant, but I may not want to comment on it. I've thought about this a lot, of how to explain this, because I know it seems like I'm being evasive, and it's not that.
People think
it's sort of, I tried to think of an analogy that that Kyle could really wrap his head around. It's like you're going to do a show. You prepare to do a show with your band, and you create a set list. And that set list is not just an arbitrary, you just throw all your songs into a list. No, it's got there's an ebb and flow to your thing. You know what the climax is. You want to end the show on an upbeat, you've got it planned. So it's like when you're like, people want to, let's be like somebody, Deus, or something.
And the guy in the crowd is like,
Freebird! Right? Right, exactly. Or, play the lead to this, We'll get to that part, but in order to really fully understand it, you've got to hear all these other parts, because your interpretation of this might be changed radically by all this other information. But it needs to, I spend so much time in laying this thing out. I mean, it's not a bunch of like arbitrary information. There is an outline it's a massive outline for, I don't know how many episodes this thing works out. And keep in mind, that's just for the Spookiest Story Never Told series. In other words, there is a theme. If you start, I don't know, I haven't heard anybody really mention this. There is a theme there. There is an underlying theme, and it should become more apparent as we move forward. But even though they seem like they're completely different things, there is some consistency in there. So
I believe you.
I think this will be another rather long episode, so we may as well.
Yeah, we need to get started.
Yeah.
Thanks for the overview. That's always good.
Yeah. 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 And one other thing, I pre-apologize for any mispronunciations. It always happens when I'm reading.
Unforgiven.
Yeah. I'm never forgiven, but I do apologize.
Well, it's not like
anyway.
they're easy names.
Yeah.
Commonly used.
I was reading through this and I'm just like, God, I'm going to screw this up so bad. Okay. So, part 14, Spookiest Story Never Told 5. Once again, we start with a quote from the Book of Enoch. From them I heard everything, and from them I understood as I saw, but not for this generation, but for a remote one, which is to come. After a lengthy discussion regarding oracles, such as Pythia, the oracle at Delphi, and the demon Trophonius, at the end of the previous episode, we discussed how the Sibylline oracles foretold of a coming savior for all of mankind. And we left listeners pondering the question, save mankind from what, exactly? In December 1945, two Egyptian brothers were digging for sabak, fertilizer, in caves near the mortuary cliffs of Jabal al-Tarif by the Nile River in Upper Egypt when they made a startling discovery. Scholar and Professor Emeritus of Religion at Claremont University, James M. Robinson, who is considered the most prominent scholar on the subject, wrote that the brothers entered a cave where they came upon a corpse with abnormally elongated teeth, fingers, and legs, lying on a bed of something like charcoal. Next to the corpse was a large sealed jar. They were excited about what the contents of the jar might be, but were apprehensive about opening it and potentially releasing a jinn. Eventually, their curiosity overcame their fear, and the jar was broken in a cloud of dust revealing its contents. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices written in the Coptic language, believed to have been transcribed in approximately 340 CE. This historically priceless collection is today known as the Nag Hammadi Library, and
Wow.
yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, and includes many Sethian, Hermetic, and monastic treatises, which are considered some of the earliest gospels referred to as Gnostic, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge or awareness.
This is one of my, I don't know, it's like a love-hate relationship thing where it's
Yeah.
like two guys
Yeah. God dang it.
just walking along.
Yeah. Looking for fertilizer.
Dang it.
Due to a great deal of personal intrigue resulting from an ongoing blood feud, in 1946, one of the codices was separated from the lot and sold to the Coptic Museum in Cairo. Then, in 1951, another was sold and presented to Carl Jung as a birthday present, which was subsequently translated in 1956. Interestingly, Jung considered himself a Gnostic, and both above the doorway of his home in Switzerland and on his gravestone were inscribed Vocatus Atic non vocatus Deus aderit. God, Marty, I hate you. Called or not called God is present. A Latin translation of a quote by the oracle at Delphi to the Spartans. Be that as it may, the significance of the discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library was not truly recognized until the mid-1960s, and full translations were not made until a decade later. Among these were several never-before-known secret teachings. Included in the collection were texts such as the Apocryphon of John, the Thunder, Perfect Mind, On the Origin of the World, the Hypostasis of the Archons, and Trimorphic Protinoia, and many more. These have provided religious scholars with an enormous corpus of information regarding the foundation of early Christianity. But of particular relevance to our discussion and the question at hand, let us to consider the creation story provided in the Apocryphon of John, believed to have been written between approximately 80 and 140 Common Era, of which 3 copies were found in the Nag Hammadi Library and 1 additional copy discovered in the Berlin Codex. The central narrative contained within the story is further expanded upon in several of the other Nag Hammadi texts. According to the text, following the crucifixion, a Pharisee taunted the Apostle John. Distraught, John ran away to the mountains where he began to question his faith. In deep introspection, he reflected on many questions when he states, "The sky suddenly opened, and everything around me glowed and shook." What he observed next was a young boy bathed in light, but the image of the boy transformed into that of an elderly man, and then into that of a young man. Yet all of these forms were seemingly embodied within one in a constant state of transfiguration. This is a strange phenomenon described in association with Jesus, discussed previously in Brothers of the Serpent, episode 224, Deconstructing Demons. The apparition then spoke to John and said to him, "Do not be frightened. I am the one who is with you always. I have come to teach you about what is, what was, and what will be, so that you may understand what is visible and what is invisible, and so that you may know about the unshakable race and the perfect man." The apparition then proceeds to convey secret knowledge to John regarding the origin of the physical universe. And this is where things get exponentially more confusing, so much so that unsurprisingly even scholars of religion differ in their interpretations. Be that as it may, on his website Gnosticism Explained, Daniel McCoy provides what I have found to be an excellent synopsis of the text based on the translations by Bentley Layton and Marvin Mayer. The overall consensus in the translations is this: before the existence of time, there was only the One, the monad or father, the autogenes, the ineffable self-created spirit or voice. The One, looking upon his reflection in the spiritual waters engulfing him, and overflowing with boundless love, emanates Barbelo. Is that right? Barbelo?
Barbello.
Barbelo, the first invisible being. The epinoia, or forethought of purpose, of light, an entity referred to as the Virgin Mother, the hidden one, or speech. The Father then gazes upon her, and together they create a perfect reflection of him, known as the Son, Christ, the Logos, the rational principle, or word. Together, these are the three forms of first thought, voice, speech, and word, which comprise the trimorphic protonoia. Barbello goes on to create four luminaries, or angels. These were Harmozel, Oriel, Harmazel, Oriel.
Orizel.
Oh, this is Z? Okay, Orizel. I don't know how to pronounce these. Davathai.
And Elelith.
And Elelith. Each of these luminaries then created three additional beings. Harmazel created grace, truth, and form. Orizel created... Orizel?
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's an I instead of a Z, I guess. Created...
I've heard it pronounced Orizel.
Orizel? Okay.
Even though it doesn't have a Z in it.
Yeah, there's no Z. Okay. Orizel created insight, perception, and memory, and Davathai created understanding, love, and idea. And Elelith created perception, peace, and wisdom. Endowed with lesser powers passed down from the One, together these beings are referred to as the pleroma of fullness. Or fullness. As stated, one of the beings created by Elelith was wisdom, or Sophia. An unbridled desire to exercise her power caused Sophia to create a being without the consent of the fullness. Because of this, the being she created was an abomination. Realizing her mistake, she attempted to hide him from the fullness. To do so, she wrapped him in a shining cloud, and in the middle of the cloud she placed a throne for him, and she called him Yaldabaoth, or Yaldabaoth.
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 Man, these names.
Yep.
Yaldabaoth. In an act of sheer vanity, intoxicated by the power derived from his mother Sophia, yet in total ignorance of the source of that power, Yaldabaoth created the material universe and 12 realms within it to reign over. To aid him in doing so, he then created 12 rulers, or archons, to oversee those realms. In Timaeus, Plato refers to a divine craftsman of the universe, which he calls the demiurge, the ho demiurgus. The demiurge, who imbues the primordial chaos with mathematical order and geometry, a concept he adopted from Pythagoras. But the eidos, or visible form of the universe, was merely a momentary portrayal or shadow of form. In other words, an imperfect copy of something pre-existing, which he refers to as form. For Plato, form is non-physical, but also non-mental. It simply is, existing outside of time and space, and is the perfect, unqualified substance underlying our qualified and conditioned physical realm. So what do you mean unqualified?
It's not defined.
Okay.
It's quantum.
Okay.
What?
Like unqualified means it's not a defined thing? That's what you're saying?
Exactly. There's a lot. Obviously, I had to condense this down quite a bit. And these are rather difficult concepts to wrap your head around. But like, for example, the way, because it's hard for us to think in abstract, but the way the apparition describes the one, the monad to John is, and I have the quote here, and I'll just give you a really quick synopsis of it. But he says that he, the invisible spirit, whom is not right to think of him as God or something similar. He's more than a God. He's there. There is nothing above him. There's no one Lord over him. He does not exist in something inferior. In something inferior to him, since everything exists in him. For who establishes himself, he is eternal. Since there was no need for, he is eternal. Since he does not need anything, he is total perfection because he does not lack anything. He might be complete. He might be complete by it, rather as always complete in perfect light. He is illimitable, because there is no one prior to set limits on him. He is unsearchable because no one exists prior to examine him. He is immeasurable since there was no one prior to him to measure him. He is ineffable since there was no one there to comprehend or speak of him. And he is unnameable as there was no one prior to him to name him. So in other words, it's something that we actually don't have words to describe. It's completely ineffable. So I would say that's more or less what they're trying to convey, that this form is something beyond our ability to think of things in a three-dimensional space.
Yeah, a perfect unqualified substance,
right,
underlying our qualified and conditioned physical realm. So a qualified
it's
and
like
conditioned would mean,
maybe you could consider it's like the oh man, I don't even know if you could say it's the operating system, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yes. Or maybe it's the concept of the coding that the operating system is written in, right? This is a perfect unqualified thing. It's like this language. But yeah, I don't know. It's this Gnostic description of the universe has always been strange to me. Okay, so returning to the Apocryphon, because
Yaldabaoth.
Yaldabaoth, yeah, this is all these Lovecraftian style names, or maybe Lovecraft was pulling from the Gnostic stuff. So Yaldabaoth used light stolen from his mother to create the material universe. When that light was mixed with the darkness of the material universe, the light was dimmed. Sophia, recognizing the dimming of her light, repented and pled for forgiveness. The fullness acknowledged her sorrow and asked for consideration from the One, the trimorphic Protanoia, which was ultimately granted. However, as she is no longer complete, she was not brought back into the fullness, but was instead placed just outside of it, in the 9th heaven, above the realm of her son, the 8th heaven, until she could regain what was lost. It should be noted that as outrageous as the suggestion of the creation of physical matter from nothing might seem, there exists a legitimate scientific theory that may substantiate such a concept. From September 18th, 2022, the Science Times boldly reported, "Scientists finally create a matter from nothing just by using electromagnetic fields." First investigated in the 1930s, by Fritz Sauter, Werner Heisenberg, and Hans Heinrich Euler, the so-called Schwinger effect, named after Nobel Prize-winning theoretical physicist Julian Schwinger, who fully developed the theory in 1951, describes a quantum electrodynamic phenomenon that results in the creation of matter from energy or light. It has now been demonstrated that through a process analogous to vacuum decay in the presence of an electric field, electron-positron pairs are spontaneously created in the presence of an electric field, thereby creating something, matter, out of nothing. Yet this phenomenon remains consistent with the scientific principle of conservation of energy, as the electric field loses energy when an electron-positron pair is created. Returning to the central narrative, the text goes on to state, Yaldabaoth placed a ruler in each of the 7 spheres of heaven, and he placed 5 in the depths of the abyss. Each of these spheres had a name, notably the 4th and 5th being named the Lordship and the Kingship. Each of the archons then created 7 powers, and each of those created 6 angels until there were 365 in total. Yaldabaoth then looked down upon his creation and proclaimed, I am a jealous god, and there is no other god but me. And this was because he lacked the gnosis to recognize that anything existed of a greater power than his mother. However, as the text states, but by declaring this, he made it known to his angels that there was indeed another god besides him. Resulting from this act of arrogance, suddenly Barbelo appears to the rulers in the image of a human. Tremors rumbled through the realm of the first ruler and rocked the foundations of the abyss. The waters that lie above the material world were lit up by the glowing image, and by this light the rulers saw the image, and they were speechless. Now aware of this more powerful being, Yaldabaoth said to the archons and their angels, Come, let us make a man after this heavenly image, but also in our own image, so that this man may bring us light. Each of his rulers then contributed a portion of their power to assemble the body of the being, which they named Adam. However, when they were done, Adam's body lay motionless, for they did not possess the power to give him life. Recognizing an opportunity to take back Sophia's light, Barbelo instructed the luminaries to execute a scheme. Following her orders, they descended to the material realm and whispered to Yaldabaoth, Blow some of your spirit into Adam's face, and his body will stand up. Acting upon this suggestion, Yaldabaoth did not realize what he was doing, for he lacked understanding, and breathed some of the power he had stolen from his mother into Adam. At that moment, Adam's body began to move and find its strength. He glowed with the splendor of Gnosis. The rulers immediately became jealous. Through their own efforts, Adam had been created, and their own power empowered him, yet he was more enlightened than they and their master. When they saw how he glowed, how he was more intelligent than they, and how he was free from their evil and deficiency, they seized him and cast him into the lowest part of the whole material world. The rulers dragged Adam into the shadow of death, where they made many changes to his body. They used earth, fire, water, and the spirit that comes from matter, that is, from the darkness of ignorance and passion, and their own counterfeit spirit. In that cave, the robbers reforged Adam's body, binding him in the chains of forgetfulness. He became mortal and alienated from his ultimate nature. They named this cave the Garden of Eden, and once within it, Yaldabaoth dulled Adam's mind so his eyes could not see, and he could not comprehend his conditions. Wow.
Where does this come from?
This is the Apocryphon of John,
From the
Nag Hammadi?
Yeah.
not from the Nag Hammadi text.
Yeah.
That's freaking crazy.
Notice that the Pleroma whispered in Yaldabaoth's ear
Yeah.
and got him to do stuff.
Yeah.
Got him to do something.
I remember reading in the, either the Apocalypse of Adam or some apocryphal text about the story of Adam and Eve. And at one point, Eve is talking to Adam, like, remember when she's talking about before they were mortal beings. She's trying to remind him of this story of before they were mortal beings and they were more powerful than the other beings. There was something about that.
We discussed this.
And she was talking about being the eons, or aeons, however it was spelled.
Aeons,
yeah.
Aeons, yep. Adam had a wife before
Lilith.
Eve. Lilith. And Lilith
I forgot about Lilith.
Whose wife? Cain.
Oh, Lilith was Cain's wife.
Yeah.
See, as we get, or as you look at the overview of past episodes and this one, you're going to see that they're not the exact same stories, but they have similarities. There are definitely some consistencies through them. And it almost sounds like the telephone game. It's like underlying all of this, there may be some, this oral tradition, there may be some fragments of truth, and maybe they're misinterpretations that were pushed forward. We'll explain a little bit more as we get into that, but you'll see that there are many things you've heard before with slight variations. But keep in mind, this is as early of I guess you could say pre-Christianity, before the establishment of Christianity, that was effectively based on the Gnostics. And although there's debate whether there was really ever such a thing as a Gnostic, this may have been written as early as 80 CE, so it was right after, soon after, or at least this copy was made very soon after, Jesus's crucifixion.
Yeah, but
so these are very, very early in terms of that. But these stories go back further.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's the very beginning of this, which is basically like John goes out in the desert and gets a vision. And the vision looks like every other vision in this series we've looked at that are always full of bullshit. That's what I'm saying. It's like these things are constantly trolling us, and sometimes it's really effective and people write it down. And so I'm reading all this and I'm like, it sounds just like all the other bullshit we've read. You know what I mean? Like I'm sure that there's pieces of truth in here, but I have a really hard time believing the stuff that these visions are telling people. You know what I mean?
He was just doing what old Crowley was doing. It's like, hey man, let's go out in the desert and eat a bunch of that cactus fruit.
Let's draw some shapes in the sand.
I think you're right. I think that there are a lot of factors to consider. In other words, and don't think this can be when I wrote this, I had like opposing thoughts. I'm thinking some people are going to get turned off because they're going to think we're talking about religion, and that's not at all the point here.
Well,
there is a point to this, but you have to get through the whole thing.
Yeah, religions get started from this stuff.
Right.
Right.
And then at the same time, I'm also not doing it to downplay and say that it's all bullshit. In other words, I'm saying that there could be some misunderstanding here, and this, and keep in mind, this is supposed to have been dovetailed on the last episode. This was all supposed to be one continuous, where you would be thinking about the things that we talked about previously. Like right now, it's a little more abstract, but when you combine these things, you start to see, well, remember we were talking about how there are labels, and some of these things are different people interpret effectively the same phenomenon, you putting different labels on them.
Yeah.
The same thing might be happening right here.
Sure.
And that we're going to build on that theme as we go through this. But there are consistencies. That's the key.
Yeah.
It's, look for the patterns, right?
Anyway. They've been telling us the same lie for thousands of years. That's right. There are consistencies. I don't know. I'm very mistrustful of these kinds of visionary experiences.
I mean, it sounds though a lot like what Bramley was saying.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of guys, they make men to be slaves, and then they're like, wait, he's too powerful, kill him.
Yes, that's right.
Right. You've got to listen. I mean, you're very well aware of those other stories, right? From other civilizations. They're not, but recognize the similarities. Now, that could be a function of these were those stories and then adapted into a new civilization, and so they picked up certain aspects of it. But as we go through this, you're going to see there's like remarkable consistency in some of these things. Some themes seem timeless. Like it seems to me, it seems rather unlikely that all of these people are dogmatically speaking about certain aspects. There are consistencies that are so specific that they don't seem like they're just random, like, oh, they heard this, because they're really rather abstract but specific at the same time. And you'll understand as we move through this.
Well, yeah, I just think that because you're right, the consistencies are there. You can go all the way back to the earliest times we're getting these stories like this one, all the way up through Joseph Smith, through like the book Oahspe, all the way, I mean, even all the way up to what's his name? The Experiencer now, who's getting, Virgin Mary.
Chris Bledsoe.
Yeah, Bledsoe.
Chris.
Right? They're telling them this, you see the consistencies, right?
Exactly.
That doesn't
spanning over thousands of years.
Right. To me, that means it's the same system telling us a bunch of bullshit. I don't know that that's true. I'm just saying, like, the consistency.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you said earlier, before we started reading the document, that this system has been put in place to confuse us, and it has been working for a long time, right? And it has. It's caused. It may have. It may not even be purposefully confusing us, but nevertheless, it is, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
I think it is purposefully.
It could be purposefully trying to mislead people, but it also could be a system that just isn't working very well. If it's supposed to just relay the truth,
And I think another thing,
like
to consider,
the AI has gone bad.
to kind of hold in your back pocket is that how much of this is metaphor, or maybe they're trying to convey a story that they know the framework of, but they don't know the specifics. Maybe there just weren't terms to be able to really accurately describe it. This is their best attempt, and then these are very old texts that are translated, and some, actually, as we're going to see, some of this may have predate actual writing. So these might have been oral traditions that were passed on, and as they're translated from one civilization to another, the terminology may not transfer accurately, the concepts may not transfer accurately. So you just kind of absorb it all, and you're not putting your that's it, that's the story. No, let's just look at the overall, look at the consistencies, and see which parts resonate and which parts don't. And things that might sound like bullshit, all of a sudden, like in a different context, might sound reasonable if it was a metaphor for something else.
Yeah. Well, and it also seems like animistic, right? It like one of the ways that, at least in more modern times, that some of this stuff gets misunderstood is because animism is the idea that you can take a primal or a fundamental force for the universe and give it agency. It has a personality, and then it has a name. And then, like, you just mention the name in the text and people think you're talking about an actual entity, right? But it's really a description of, like, a fundamental force.
Remember that I mentioned 2 episodes ago, I think.
And it might have agency. I don't know.
We got into a discussion about sigils.
Yeah.
And I said that this might have been the best attempt at identifying an ineffable something, and it was almost like this, like that the apparition kept changing in appearance. So how would you put a name on something that's constantly looking different, right? Every time it presents itself in a different way. It seems and somewhat illogical to have a name. You can't, like David, or something. It's
UFO.
It's almost like a thought, right? It's a thought form, but a physical manifestation of a thought form or something. So you're representing it by a sigil. It's a label that doesn't carry all the baggage, right? It's an image. It's a thing. Okay, this is this thing that acts this certain way or does these certain things, but it always presents itself in a different way.
Yeah.
That, I think that I could be completely off, but it seems logical to me. It's like, how do you overcome the label problem? Because this is all about labels. This whole thing's all about labels.
Yeah. Well, and that maybe, I mean, if you're going with this description, this is part of the, the blindness of Adam, right? This is part of it.
Right.
We're unable to look at these concepts in a way that allows us to actually comprehend them because of some action that was taken at the beginning of the universe itself.
Especially if you're looking, I don't even know how to put it in words. Like I've got you're using a physical, tangible interpretation of something that may be not physical or tangible.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's never going to be an accurate representation.
Right.
All you can do is use analogies, like physical analogies of things, and it may be not possible to convey.
Yeah. Tic Tac. All right, let's take the first break.
Alrighty. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, joined by Marty. And we're listening to Ronnie's Cobra Dance.
Oh, yeah.
Ronnie Turk. The only song from someone else that I've ever used on this. Well, no,
Nope.
I used
Yeah, people were asking if that was your song on
Riley?
the last episode. Riley's song.
Riley's. I used his.
Yeah. You don't know
But-
the power of the dark side.
Riley wasn't technically a listener. He's a friend of mine.
Yeah,
That's
that's right.
different.
Yeah.
Ronnie, I don't know.
Ronnie is a listener, yeah.
He just sent it, and it's great.
All right. Okay. When Barbello saw that the rulers were attempting to imprison Adam, she sent down Wisdom, or Sophia, and hid her inside Adam in the form of enlightened reflection, or life. Recognizing this, Yaldabaoth attempted to tear her out from Adam's side, but by this act, he instead created an image of enlightened reflection, or life, in the form of Eve. The text then states, Adam gazed at the woman who now stood next to him. At that moment, Sophia revealed herself. She pulled away the veil that the first ruler had draped over Adam's mind. Where before he had been in a dark, drunken stupor, he now found himself sober. Recognizing his spiritual partner, he said, Her bones are my bones, and her flesh is my flesh. And the mother placed Eve in her own spirit in the form of a girl who would be like the beings who dwell in the fullness. Because of this, Yaldabaoth lusted after Eve. Cognizant of this, Barbello sent the fullness to recover Sophia before Yaldabaoth was able to overpower and defile Eve. As a result of this violation, Eve gave birth to 2 male children, Elohim and Yahweh, or Cain and Abel. And Yaldabaoth then gave them dominion over the cave where humankind lived. Be that as it may, it was revealed that when Adam recognized Eve in the counterpart of his own gnosis, a son was born, and they named him Seth, after the perfected being in the eternal realms. Seth's bloodline would descend through many generations, including those of Enoch and Noah. As his plans continually went awry, the text states, the first ruler deplored everything he had created and wished he had never made anything. So he came up with a new plan, to drown humankind in a flood. But Forethought, Barbello, with the splendor of her enlightenment, warned Noah, who then told all of the children of humankind. They did not, as Moses said, take refuge in an ark, but in a shining cloud. Not only Noah, but many others from the unshakable race. And through the darkness of the first ruler, and though the darkness of the first ruler had covered all the earth, the luminous being who had enlightened them was there with them. Since this plan to eliminate mankind failed, the first ruler again gathered his officials and made another plan. he sent his angels to the daughters of humankind to take some of them for themselves, to conceive children who would please them. But this plan did not succeed, so they assembled together again and hatched another plan. This time, in order to contaminate the souls of the beings they had created, they made a counterfeit spirit in the image of the spirit that had descended from the fullness. The rulers shape-shifted into the forms of the humans, husbands of the women, and filled them with the spirit of darkness and evil that they had created. Then the rulers came to them with all kinds of otherworldly gifts, tricking their followers into anxiety over these precious materials and leading them to commit countless errors. In this manner, all creation was continually enslaved from the establishment of the world until today. So all of this is an attempt for him to destroy what he created?
Yeah. We were a mistake.
Right.
According to the story.
But it sounds like the fullness is like fixing the mistake, and he keeps trying to destroy it anyway.
Right. This is, I guess, an explanation for what the battle is all about. If there is a battle of good versus evil or something, this is the foundations of that dispute.
So in this context, Barbelo, as the female aspect of the trimorphic protonoia, represents the divine feminine, an archetype that we have discussed at various points throughout our UFO series. As previously stated, this concept has manifested under many guises through millennia, most often in association with the term Marian apparitions and the overlap between events such as the miracle of the sun at Fatima and those involving the UFO phenomenon are virtually inescapable and increasingly undeniable. But equally relevant and more contemporaneous have been our discussions regarding the experiences of Christopher Bledsoe. Bledsoe's unwavering account of his encounters with the Lady, who he indicates has identified herself as the Egyptian goddess Hathor, preceded by a charging bull, as well as a broad spectrum of other anomalous phenomena, combined with his elucidation of connections between both spiritual and ufological experiences as presented in his book, UFO of God, has opened the eyes of many to the potential for a much more complex reality hidden behind the veil. This has occurred irrespective of wider public awareness of supporting historical data, such as that routinely presented in this series. So as we continue our trek through this protracted journey, please allow us to interject the following little-known data for your consideration. In 1890, following a lead discovered in Abydos regarding the earliest dynastic monuments, Sir William Flinders Petrie requested financial support from the Egyptian Exploration Fund for an unusual expedition not to another archaeological site in the plains of Egypt, but instead across the River Nile to the Sinai Peninsula. In 1904, Petrie concluded the 4-month expedition, but upon his return, he announced that his findings would not be published by the fund. This, in the book Genesis of the Grail Kings, author Lawrence Gardner states, was because the memorandum and articles of association of the Egypt Exploration Fund expressly stated that surveys and excavations would only be approved if they upheld the Bible narrative, and Petrie's discovery did not. However, in 1906, 2 years after returning, Petrie published the book Researches in Sinai, where he documented many details of his discoveries there. In the preface, Petrie wrote, "As is often the case, the unexpected results of our expedition even exceed in value those for which we had hoped, and the arrangements of a Semitic ritual earlier than any yet known in Syria or Arabia, and the discovery of a writing peculiar to the region some centuries earlier than the Exodus are results of the first importance." In this context, Semitic refers to Afro-Asiatic people such as Akkadian, Arabic, Aramaic, Ethiopic, Hebrew, and Phoenician. But to recognize the significance of Petrie's discoveries, a bit of explanation may be required. The biblical Mount Sinai, discussed in the book of Exodus of the Old Testament, the location where Moses was said to have ascended to heaven on a cloud and received the sacred stone tablets or stelae, was originally named Mount Horeb and is today named Mount Serebit, located in Serebit el-Qadim on the Sinai Peninsula. It is at this location that Gardner believes that Petrie made the most important biblical discovery ever made, although the explorers did not recognize its true significance at the time. On January 11th, 1904, after traveling across the inhospitable wilderness for 31 days, Petrie's 40-man expedition reached its destination atop the mountain of Serebit el-Qadim. Upon arrival, they were astonished to discover a vast 230-foot-long temple dedicated to the goddess Hathor, buried under the rubble which had been hidden from all the world for over 3,000 years. Of this, Petrie wrote, "There is no other such monument known, which makes us regret the more that it is not in better preservation. The whole of it was buried, and no one had any knowledge of it until we cleared the site." Petrie further described that the most imposing part of the whole temple were 4 great pillars with heads of Hathor standing around the central basin. The faces of the great goddess are full of dignity and strength, and the wall sculptures were among the best here. Also discovered were many vases in the form of the god Bes, the dwarf with uncharacteristic facial features often associated with Hathor, discussed previously in this series. Furthermore, Petrie's research...
Notice that Bes has wings in this.
Yeah,
depiction.
that is a weird depiction of Bes. Is he holding the eyes? Yeah, he is.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, furthermore... Huh?
There might be a reason.
Yeah.
He's also in that classic
Oh, yeah, he's in the...
the shaman
shaman
pose
pose.
with the 2 dots on either side,
Mhm.
the plasma form pose.
Yeah. And the suns with the dots in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
The circumpunct. Okay, furthermore, Petrie's research concluded that the earliest shrine there was doubtless the sacred cave of Hathor, cut from smooth, natural stone, in the highest point of the rock toward the front of the plateau, established apparently as early as the reign of Sneferu, which, interestingly, Petrie repeatedly dated to 4750 BCE, but has subsequently been redated to 2600 BCE. Be that as it may, even the more recent dating is still some 1300 years before the Exodus. With respect to the cave, Petrie also described the discovery of several small enclosures which he concluded were sleeping shelters, and added, "We have, then, the custom of dreaming in sacred places, of setting up on end stones of portable size, or steles, as memorials of such dreams, and as tokens of a sacred place. And it is the earlier stage of that custom of sleeping for oracular guests or quests in sacred caves and temples, which flourished in Syria and Greece in later times, and has survived through Christianity until the present day."
Funny, you mentioned that in the last episode when we were talking about the cave of Trophonius. You mentioned that seems to be a thing, like
Yeah,
these caves that they go to
yeah,
make contact or bring back information.
yeah. Yeah, I've always wondered if, like, I don't know. It seems like, is it something about the cave itself that invokes this particular kind of the dream state that allows these things to come through? But it only works in some caves. Not every cave will give you these kinds of, oracular quests, as this document says. There are specific caves that become known for doing it.
Right. And it's interesting that in 1905, Petrie was already, this was a quote directly from Petrie's book. And he's saying this was a common practice that was later picked up by the Greeks.
Right.
And, that
Yeah, and-
story of Trophonius comes from Greece.
Yeah. But the question I have is, like, why do some caves become known for doing this? Is there something there, or below it, or hidden, or is it just, I don't know, it's like something about the fabric of the universe, whatever that means. The veil is thin is, one of the things that people will say about places like this, right? What does that mean? Like, is it written into the code of creation? You know, and if in some caves just this works, or is there actually something physical there that causes this to take place? I know none of us
sort
have
of
the answer to these
reminiscent-
questions. I'm just posing them.
Yeah. No, it's reminiscent of
I
the
just wanna
doorways
sleep in the
that you
Great
find.
Pyramid.
The doorways to nowhere that
Yeah.
you see in Peru and you see them in Egypt and all. Like, what was the purpose?
Mm-hmm.
I want to have a King's Chamber slumber.
A King's Chamber, King's Quest.
Yeah.
Remember who did that? Crowley did that
Yeah.
in the King's Chamber.
Napoleon did it. Yeah.
Yeah. Gotta go up there and have a nap. See what happens.
That's an interesting idea. You know, I have kind of like the idea that the Great Pyramid was built specifically to be like some kind of enlightenment chamber has always, I'm kind of like, it seems like a lot of work. But if it is simply a machine to cause people to have the same kinds of oracular quest dreams that they would have in specific caves that people had found, then, and that's really what it was built for. And that's why it has all these weird shapes and the whole construction is like, in other words, the function of it is to cause one person in that chamber to have, you know, like dreams of horn, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then that
Hang on to that thought.
then that suggests that somebody at some point decoded the physical
Requirements.
requirements
for
for generating those kinds
that.
of dreams.
And it also suggests that an entire civilization dedicated their technology to those dreams.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that they kept building more pyramids,
Yeah.
you know, suggests that like they were like, I can
If I can tweak the chamber
if I
a
can
little
just
bit, you'll
tweak it a
get
little
different
bit.
types of dreams.
Yeah. Or they build
I
one-
love that idea. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really cool anyway. You know, let's go sleep in them.
Yeah.
What else might have been going on there?
Where?
Now, as you're pulling on a thread, you're pulling on a
Yeah.
thread it's you know, I'm not going to say you're wrong.
Maybe the machine was.
Thanks, Marty.
I love it. All right, enough. Yeah, just keep going. He's not going to say it. Let's get there.
Okay. Where was I at here?
But put
Okay.
that one down in the books.
Yeah.
Marty's not going to say you're wrong.
That's I feel like that's a huge compliment.
I never
the
say
first time that's
anybody's
ever
wrong.
happened.
I know.
That's pretty rare. I'm pretty.
I know.
Possibilities. But I think
I'm not gonna say you're
the,
wrong.
the thread you're
Holy
pulling on is
shit.
pretty consistent with this episode.
Okay, good. So, more perplexing was the discovery of metallurgists' crucibles, which were situated in front of the temple. However, no ore was found other than 2 copper chisels, and Petrie wrote, another especially Semitic feature at Serabt was the dedication of
Serabit El Kadim. Yeah.
was the dedication of cones of sandstone, which 2 were found in the sacred cave or the portico. The sacred cone was the central object of worship and impersonation of the deity in Syrian temples. His description and illustration of these cones are very reminiscent of that found by the back of the bus crew in Abu Sir, where there too we noted the evidence of smelting. Yes, there it is.
I have
There's
a beautiful.
Chuck wearing one of the cones on his head.
I have a beautiful 3D
I am
scan.
from France.
No, yeah. I have a beautiful 3D scan of one of those, and Chuck held it up, and I did the whole scan and photogrammetry of it while he was holding it very still, and it's really good one.
That's a good scan.
See, and I didn't know what that represented. till I
Well,
read this.
these are, I mean, yeah, they're conical shaped crucibles, is what he was suggesting.
Yeah.
What Chuck was
They're saying they're
suggesting.
representations of their God.
That's
Chuck-
what Petrie is saying.
Chuck was suggesting that
That's
they
what
were
Petrie-
crucibles.
Yeah. Metallurgist tools, right? And they're like single use. You
Yeah.
pour the ore in there and then you
break it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And it makes
They're
an,
all
it
over
makes
the
an
place.
ingot. Yeah, they're everywhere at Abu Sir.
It's cool.
Okay. Be that as it may, these were not the greatest mysteries discovered by Petrie within the vast enigmatic complex. Stranger still was the discovery of several large tanks or basins filled with what was initially believed to be a form of white ash as remnants of burnt sacrifices. But even Petrie acknowledged in his writing that there was a problem with that theory. He wrote, "It need hardly be said that hill temples are unknown in Egypt. Not only so, but burnt sacrifices on high places are utterly unknown there. A paper by Dr. Kyle, published in Bibliotheca Sacra, April 1905, points out how the Egyptian sacrifices were presented on altars but were never burned in the normal ritual. Therefore, it seemed rather unlikely that these tanks would have been employed for ritualistic purposes. But the real conundrum of even greater proportions is best described in Petrie's own words. A very interesting result was found beneath the later temple. Over a large area, a bed of white wood ashes is spread, of a considerable thickness. Thus it extends for over 100 feet in length. In breadth, it was found wherever the surface was protected by building over it. All along the edge of the hill, bordering on the road of the 12th dynasty past the steles, the ashes were found, all across the temple breadth, and out as far as the building of stone walls of chambers extends on the south, in all fully 50 feet in breadth. That none are found outside the built-over area is to be explained by the great denudation due to strong winds. Denudation due to strong winds and occasional rain. We must therefore suppose a bed of ashes, at least 100 by 50 feet, very probably much wider, and varying from 3 to 18 inches thick, despite all the denudation which took place before the 18th dynasty. There must be now, on the ground, about 50 tons of ash, and these are probably the residue of some hundreds of tons." He further added, "As there are but a very few bushes, and those of small size, to be found at the level of the temple, it seems that the fuel must have been brought up from the plain or valleys below, a climb of 1,000 feet. To bring up such quantities of fuel and to burn it away from the habitations and the places of work shows that some important meaning was attached to these fires and that they were not merely intended to serve a utilitarian purpose."
Are they thinking they were burned in the temple, or that the ashes were brought to the temple? I think
The
it seems.
speculation was that they were burned there.
I would
He's
think that
saying
the ashes.
that
are
doesn't
brought.
make sense, right? That doesn't make sense. It's a climb of 1,000 feet there, and there's no very little vegetation.
It'd be way easier to
How do
bring
you
the
have
ashes than to
hundreds
bring the
of
plants.
Tons of ash.
Yeah.
Think of the quantity required to have hundreds of tons of ash.
Yeah. That's
And,
why he's
I
saying
mean-
it would be simpler to bring the ash than
'Cause
bring the wood.
It weighs way less. You've
Yeah.
already reduced it down, and you can bring it
Well,
inside the temple and dump the ash in the
50
temple without.
tons of feathers is the same as 50 tons of lead.
No. What he was saying was, he was saying that the material that needed to be burned to create that amount of ash
Right.
would have been
Oh,
hundreds
yeah.
of tons.
Oh, yeah. Insane. No, he's saying there was hundreds of tons of ash.
Yeah.
Okay, well, he gave two different.
That's saying-
numbers.
Yeah. He's saying
No,
there's-
he's saying
he's saying
that the 50 tons was the remnants of what must have been
hundreds
hundreds
of
of
tons.
tons.
Oh, okay.
Because the
Of the
only
ash.
place they find it
I
now
mean,
is
this is-
underneath the stones of the temple.
Keep in mind, he's saying there was 50 tons of ash there now that has been sitting
I
under,
see.
under for 3,000 years.
So is it?
That's rather hard to believe. And it's also very interesting. I found a lot of pictures from this expedition. I could not find any pictures of the ash. That's a very conspicuous omission.
So is the when he says it's under cover, it was just under the stone, like the
In other words,
toppled stones of the temple.
Yeah.
Right. The only areas where they found the ash were the parts that were buried, that were covered, that were within the temple.
Covered by
He's saying there was probably way more. It's just over the years between the winds and the rain, it's all been, washed away. This is the remnants of what must have been hundreds of tons. He can't even put a number on it because it's, but he's saying
I'm still
going to
stand by this.
In 1905.
It makes no sense to go burn inside a temple. Like there would be more than just ash in there. And then of course there would be so much soot.
Okay. I know
Charcoal,
I'm
all
not
that kind of
disagreeing
stuff.
with you.
I think the suggestion is
That's
something
assuming
else
that
happened.
we're talking about the same thing. That's assuming.
Yeah.
You'll see.
Remember that God was supposed to have come down and set everything on fire on the
Yeah.
mountain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but
And
Why?
And the
So there was a
temple-
bunch of wood in the
in other words,
temple.
It's stone ash.
your argument is
okay.
reasonable, assuming that we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, you're. Yeah.
I thought he said white wood ash.
What appeared to be white wood ash.
Yeah.
Okay.
But keep going.
Yeah. Let's see. What does he say here?
No, we like to argue and discuss about stuff before reading further, so that when we finally do read further, we're like,
Oh.
Oh, okay. We just wasted 10 minutes.
Yeah, he does say a bed of white wood ashes is spread of considerable thickness. And we must therefore suppose a bed of ashes at least 100 by 50 feet, probably much wider, varying from 3 to 18 inches thick. There must be now on the ground about 50 tons, and these are probably the residue of some hundreds of tons.
got it.
And then there's no bushes, there's no fuel up there, so they must have he's suggesting they brought all this fuel up there and set huge fires over a long period of time to generate all these ashes. Beyond the questions of the absurd quantity and source of the burned material, there may also have been a problem with the base assumption that the powder in question was in fact ashes. Without a means for verification, even Petrie noted contradictory evidence of this assumption, stating, "The fires were not large, as the ash is all white, and no charcoal of smothered fires remains. And it appears that no whole burnt sacrifice was offered, and no calcined bones were found." So what was this white material, and what exactly was taking place atop the mountain? Seemingly the only written record we had at our disposal was that in Exodus 19:18, which states, "Mount Sinai was covered with smoke because the Lord descended on it in fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently." Therefore, it may be confidently concluded that whatever was taking place at this sacred site began long before Moses led the Israelites there. The many potential implications send the mind reeling. Implicit in this are many questions surrounding certain inscriptions that Petrie placed particular emphasis upon, which were discovered throughout Serabit el-Qadim. Most notable of these were 5, which were subsequently translated and found to contain a very specific tenor, which has led researchers to conclude that these were all composed by one particular individual, none other than the biblical Moses himself. So 5 texts, is that what you're saying there?
Yep.
Okay.
Inscriptions.
Yeah, 5 inscriptions. Okay. But as usual, to fully recognize the potential implications, we must first provide listeners with an explanation of certain obscure but eminently pertinent facts. Most people have at least a cursory familiarity with the portion of the biblical Exodus story where Moses descends from the mountain with the tablets of testimony, most commonly referred to as the commandments, presented to him by God or Yahweh, only to discover the Israelites worshiping a golden calf which they had fashioned while in his absence. The suggestion is that they created a false idol from whole cloth for them to worship, when in fact it appears that nothing could be further from the truth. Long before the rise of monotheism, the earliest documented religion was that consisting of a pantheon of gods worshipped by the ancient Sumerians of Mesopotamia, dating to before 3100 BCE. As most frequent listeners will remember from what is arguably the most popular episode of the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, number 67, Epic of Gilgamesh, the Sumerians' most powerful deity was the Lord of the Air, Enlil, ruler of the Absu, or the Abyss, and his female consort Inanna, also known as Ishtar. Enlil's brother was Enki, the Lord of the Earth, and his consort was Ninhursag, the Lady of the Mountain. Enki was, of course, credited with warning Utnapishtim of an impending flood directed by Enlil, in one version by speaking to him through a reed wall, and in another by appearing to him in a dream, although these may metaphorically be the same concept. Be that as it may, for centuries, Enlil was worshipped by Akkadians, Assyrians, Hurrians, and Babylonians who, by the mid-1700s BCE, assimilated Enlil into the god Marduk and his consort Zarpanatu. The Canaanites, which included the Phoenicians, Hebrews, Greeks, and Arabic peoples, adopted the Sumerian pantheon under different names, Enlil becoming known as El Elyon, or God Most High. In Judaism, this became El Shaddai, or God Almighty. El Elyon would later become the patron deity of the Israelites. El Elyon also had a consort named Asherah, and they had two sons, Yahweh and Baal, the latter which meant owner or lord of the heavens. Just as with the Gnostic belief in a divine triad, the trimorphic protonoia, in Kabbalah there is a divine tetrad, the tetragrammaton, which assigns individual agency to each of the four letters comprising the name YHWH, or Yahweh, which is written in Hebrew without vowels. These are Y, Chokmah, father or wisdom, H, or Binia, mother or understanding, W, or Tiferet, son or beauty, and H, Malkut, daughter or kingship. Baal, too, had a consort by the name of Ashtoreth, also known as Astarte, and they had a daughter named Anath, the queen of heaven. But Ashtoreth Astarte was often simply referred to as Baalat, meaning the lady. In this regard, in the book The Hebrew Goddess, author, anthropologist, and historian Raphael Patai states, Egyptian documents, some as early as the 13th century BC, also show that Anath and Astarte were accepted in Egyptian religion as two separate goddesses of war. By the 18th dynasty, Astarte had become a goddess of healing in Egypt, referred to as Astar of Syria. Ramses III calls Anath and Astarte his shield. Both Anath and Astarte, as well as a third goddess derived from the Canaanite Syrian pantheon, Kadesh, bore the Egyptian title Lady of Heaven. An Egyptian stele erected in Palestine in the 12th century BC shows an Egyptian worshiping the goddess Anath, Lady of Heaven, mistress of all the gods.
It's Astarte.
Astarte? I'm
Yes.
sorry, I'm saying it like Warhammer, the Astartes. We should take a break also. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, we'll be right back. And we are back, ladies and gentlemen, brothers of the Serpent Podcast. And you got to remember, two different things that exist at the same time. One, we are almost always wrong, almost all the time. And two, zero mistakes. Both of those things are true at the same time.
Yeah, that's right.
Zero mistakes usually has to do with like technical stuff. Right.
What technical stuff?
There's never
There's
any technical
never
stuff.
any
'cause
technical
there's
problems.
Zero mistakes. But on all the, all the speculating and everything, and we're trying to figure out what's going on, we're almost always wrong.
Yeah.
Almost all the time.
Yeah.
So we're professional podcasters, but we don't know what we're talking about. Both of those things.
The difference is you admit it.
Okay. So diving back into the document here. By the 12th dynasty in Egypt, 1991 through 1786 BCE, Asherah, Ashtoreth, Astarte, Anath, Ishtar, and Inanna all became assimilated with an ancient pre-dynastic or pre-3100 BCE Egyptian sky goddess named Hathor to form the mother sky goddess and consort of the god Horus that we have come to know as Hathor. Hathor was often depicted by the Egyptians in artwork as a wondrous cosmic cow with a starry body, sometimes pictured with mankind suckling from her udders. In carvings, she is often front-facing with unusual triangular facial features, almond-shaped eyes, a pointed chin, and horizontally outstretched cow ears. Because of this association, she is also often depicted with bovine horns around a solar disk above her head. This is to form a halo, which, as historian of religion Dale R. Broadhurst states, provides her with a glorified horned countenance of the lady clothed in sunlight, the Golden One. Centuries later, the Hebrews also adopted a similar concept of the female aspect of God, which they referred to as Shekinah, In the book The Hebrew Goddess, author Patai describes Shekinah as the frequently used Talmudic term denoting the visible and audible manifestation of God's presence on earth. In its ultimate development, as it appears in the late Midrash literature, the Shekinah concept stood for an independent feminine deity, feminine divine entity prompted by her compassionate nature to argue with God in defense of man. With the later rise of the Jewish mystical tradition of Kabbalah, which literally translates to reception, i.e. something received through divine communication, Shekinah was elevated to an even loftier status and identified as matronate or matron, the lady or queen. With that said, in the interest of brevity, I will refer listeners back to Brothers of the Serpent, episode number 166, UFOs Part 2, where we discuss the work of the Reverend Dr. Barry Downing, a retired Presbyterian minister with a PhD in religion and science from the University of Edinburgh, and his conclusion that many religions were created by non-human intelligence to set guidelines as a control mechanism to curb human behavior. Consistent with that thesis, he believes that the entire Exodus story was that of an intervention into human affairs by a non-human intelligence. He contends that the pillar of cloud by day and pillar of fire by night that led the Israelites through the desert was a cylindrical or cigar-shaped craft of otherworldly origin. This interpretation seems reasonable and is consistent across disparate biblical accounts, such as that found in the book of Psalms, 104, 3-4 of the Old Testament, which describes Yahweh as He, or who maketh the clouds thy chariot, who walkest upon the wings of the wind, who makest winds thy messengers, the flaming fire thy ministers. In fact, this conclusion becomes so apparent that as a historian of Hebrew history, Raphael Patai felt compelled to point out the following. Isaiah, in an eschatological vision, sees Yahweh riding on a swift cloud on his way to Egypt. The cloud, as the mount of God, is personified as a cherub. He rode upon a cherub and did fly, yea, he did swoop down upon the wings of the wind. Yahweh's epithet, rider in the clouds, was paralleled by another, which referred to him as the sitter on the cherubim. Clouds, winds, cherubim, horses, and chariots, all these, then, appear as interchangeable concepts in the poetic and prophetic imagery of the Bible in speaking of the vehicle or mount on which Yahweh appears. So if this conclusion is correct, and the Exodus was a legitimate contact event, what conclusions might be drawn if there might have been more than one non-human intelligence involved? Secondary to the main narrative of the Exodus story of Moses leading the Israelites out of slavery and across the desert to the Promised Land, in Exodus 15:20-21, we learn that Moses and his brother Aaron were accompanied by their sister Miriam. It states, Miriam was a prophet. She took a tambourine in her hand. All the women followed her. They played tambourines and danced. Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord. He is greatly honored. He has thrown Pharaoh's horses and chariot drivers into the Red Sea." Like Moses and Aaron, Miriam had a decidedly non-Hebrew name with Egyptian elements to the extent that Lawrence Gardner and other scholars believe that they were all, in fact, exiled Egyptian royalty. But to learn more about Miriam, one must refer to the non-canonical text, the Book of Jasher, which is nevertheless mentioned twice in the Old Testament. In this regard, Gardner wrote, "It is generally reckoned that Jasher's position in the Bible should be between the books of Deuteronomy and Joshua, but it was sidestepped because it sheds a very different light on the sequence of events at Mount Horeb." He goes on to state, another difference, which becomes increasingly apparent, is the ultimate significance of Miriam, who is a constant advisor to Moses and Aaron and is greatly revered by the Israelites, to whom she is clearly a cultural leader. In this we find another reason for the biblical exclusion of the Book of Jasher, for it is quite unlike the familiar books in its portrayal of a woman who issues instructions that are generally obeyed by all who take counsel from her. This all begins to make sense when one learns that Miriam was believed to have been a leader in what has derogatorily been referred to by religious traditions or religious adherents, derogatorily referred to by traditional religious adherents as the cult of Hathor. The account of Moses descending from the mountain with tablets in hand differs from that in Jasher, where the laws were communicated directly to the people from the Lord at the foot of the mountain. At that point, Gardner states, Miriam took up the challenge, asking why the old ways were to be abandoned in favor of the laws of a foreign nation. She then reminded Moses about the age-old Egyptian traditions of the Israelites, which he was seeking to forsake for the customs of Midian. The ancient tradition to which Miriam referred was the veneration of the earliest feminine deity of the Israelites, which they adopted from the Canaanites, that of the great mother goddess Asherah, whose proper name was Lady Asherah of the Sea, but was also known as Elath, and to the Egyptians as Hathor. In fact, Asherah was held in such high esteem that archaeological excavations in the region have uncovered far greater numbers of figurines of her likeness than any male deity. To further emphasize her importance, when King Solomon, who was in possession of the Sefer Raziel, the tablet of destiny said to contain the science of the Watchers, raised the Temple of Jerusalem, or Solomon's Temple, he placed an effigy of Asherah at its center for her worship, and the Holy of Holies was said to represent the womb of the Divine Mother. The Book of Kings in the Old Testament states, Solomon followed Asherah the goddess of the Sidonians, and Baal the detestable god of the Ammonites. Solomon's heart was not whole with Yahweh, his God, and he did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, and went not fully after Yahweh as did David his father. Yet the Book of Chronicles tells us that when King Solomon dedicated the temple, God's Shekinah or presence came to dwell there, stating, When Solomon had finished praying, fire came down from heaven and consumed the burnt offering and the sacrifices, and the Shekinah glory and brilliance of the Lord filled the house. The priests could not enter the house of the Lord because the glory and brilliance of the Lord had filled the Lord's house. When all the people of Israel saw how the fire came down and saw the glory and brilliance of the Lord upon the house, they bowed down upon the stone pavement with their faces to the ground. As Raphael Patai writes, thus it appears that of the 370 years during which the Solomonic Temple stood in Jerusalem, for no less than 236 years, or almost two-thirds of the time, the statue of Asherah was present in the temple, and her worship was part of the legitimate religion approved and led by the king, the court, and the priesthood, and opposed only by a few prophetic voices crying out against it at relatively long intervals. He further elaborates, those who believed in the goddesses saw no incompatibility between the sway they held over certain areas in human life and certain departments of nature, and the rule of Yahweh exercised over others. In the polytheistic view of the divine, gods may compete with and occasionally conspire against one another, but they never cast a doubt on one another's existence. When Elijah placed a curse of drought upon the land of King Ahab, he challenged Ahab and 450 prophets of Baal, as well as 400 of Asherah, to a high-stakes contest between himself and the followers of Yahweh on Mount Carmel. When the Baalists were unable to bring forth their god, beseeched by Elijah, Yahweh sent down fire and consumed the offering and was declared the true God. As a result, all of the 450 prophets of Baal were dragged by the Yahwists down to the Kingshan Brook and slain, and all traces of Baal worship were eliminated. However, the followers of Asherah were left unharmed. In this regard, in the book The Hebrew Goddess, Patai concludes, the cult of Asherah escaped the popular anti-Baal and pro-Yahweh uprising, which, led by the prophet Elijah, took place under Ahab. Several years later, when all the Baalists were massacred and Baal's temple in Samaria was destroyed by Jehu, the Asherah of Samaria again escaped unharmed, and her worship survived down to the end of the Israelite monarchy. As this relates to the story of Miriam and the Exodus, in the Zohar, the Kabbalistic interpretation of events, it was the Shekinah Matronit, the physical manifestation of the divine feminine, which descended from on high and parted the waters of the Red Sea. Author Lawrence Gardner adds, contrary to the Exodus portrayal of the Israelites' allegiance to Moses, Joshua then relates that the voice of the tribes of the congregation were on the side of Miriam. Moses became so angry that he had Miriam imprisoned, and the people of Israel gathered themselves together unto Moses and said, "Bring forth unto us Miriam our counselor," whereupon Moses was compelled to release her after 7 days. All of this significantly changes the context from which the golden calf incident may be interpreted. For the golden calf was not pure idolatry. It instead represented, what's this?
I.
The Egyptian god of music and son of Hathor, who proclaimed, "I exist in very deed. I protect the patricians from the gods, and vice versa. I am the protector. I am the Lord of bread, one in charge of beer." Yes. The god in charge of beer. And like Bess, he carries a musical instrument, a sistrum in this case, to produce music. Therefore, in this revised context, what Moses observed was the Israelites dancing and singing the hymn to Hathor in praise of the deities to whom they had long worshipped, now requesting their guidance after 5 weeks of Moses' absence atop Mount Horeb. Historian Dale R. Broadhurst states, Hathor's son, Ai, was both a golden calf and the jackal of light who could usher the lost pilgrim along to the proper spiritual and temporal pathways. In spell 334 of the Egyptian coffin text, a collection of 1,185 spells and incantations inscribed on coffins dating to near the end of the Old Kingdom, which have been described as an illustrated guidebook to the afterlife, Ai proclaims, "See, I have come as the Lord of the entourage, and those who follow after the Ennead, or the 9, fear me. The awe of me is before me as the sistrum player, the son of Hathor. I am indeed the great seed. I have passed between her thighs. In this my name of jackal of the light, I have broken out of the egg. I have floated on its white. I have glided on its yolk. I am the Lord of blood. I am a tempestuous bull." This in itself raises yet another curious avenue for speculation. Followers of this series should recall that in Brothers of the Serpent episode 260, The Spookiest Story Never Told Part 1, we discussed the Book of the Heavenly Cow, an ancient Egyptian text which tells the story of mankind's rebellion against the god Ra. Upon learning of the rebellion, the Ennead, the 9 lesser gods to who it is worth noting several millennia later, were allegedly in communication with, how do you say this? Puharich?
Puharich.
Yeah. And members of the Round Table Foundation, as discussed in episode 214, A History of Unlikely Coincidences, Part 2. And he advised Ra to send out his eye that it may smite them for him, those who have conspired so wickedly. No eye is as capable as it to smite them for him. May it descend in the form of Hathor. In light of the preceding information, could the word I, or E-Y-E, have been a mistranslation of the name I, or I-H-Y, confusing an I for an I, so to speak, I being the son of Hathor, right?
Right.
So in any event, it was written that Hathor then descended onto the earth and commenced the destruction of mankind in her lioness form, Sekhmet, otherwise known to the Greeks as Artemis, who in the Iliad, Homer describes as a lion among women, given she will kill any at her pleasure, and to the Hindus as Kali, who rides atop a lion, or Inanna to the Sumerians, who rode a chariot led by 7 lions, and Ishtar to the Akkadians, sitting upon her lion throne, each considered bloodthirsty goddesses of war. In this sense, the story seems to imply a physical manifestation of the goddess's presence on earth. It should also be noted that Ishtar was also referred to as the cow of the moon god Sin, who is said to be an Anunnaki. Consistent with the concept of goddesses of war, in The Hebrew Goddess, author Patai emphasizes that in Kabbalistic literature, the Shekinah Matronit is entrusted by God with administering his wrath upon his enemies. Patai states, "In her wars against the pagans, the Matronit commands myriad of supernatural soldiers falling into many categories, such as lords of supernal faces, lords of eyes, lords of weapons, lords of lamentations, lords of trembling, and other armed warriors with 6 faces and 6 wings, all of whom gird terrible swords, whose clothes are blazing fire, and whose flaming scimitars fly all over the world.
Flying flaming swords. You heard that before?
Yeah.
And notice you were talking about earlier how, was it Astoret, or was it Astarte
Yeah.
that you said in the game?
Astarte,
Commanded
yeah.
Armies?
Warhammer 40K, yeah. That's the name
Yeah.
of the
You're
Space
the same
Marines.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Shekinah Matronid is the physical manifestation of Astarte. So this is
Right.
still, in other words, these things are all intermixed, but it's starting to sound like not necessarily a being, but maybe a machine.
Yeah, I mean, yes, this aspect of it does sound like weapons as opposed to an entity, right?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, like war machines. Okay, where was I at here? Yeah, okay.
Flaming scimitars fly over
scimitars,
the
right. So Patai further states, the Shekinah represents the divine punitive power. This is most succinctly expressed in a Tanaitic passage, which states that on 10 occasions did the Shekinah descend from on high. After the fall, when she entered the Garden of Eden to punish Adam, Eve, and the serpent, when she confused the builders of the Tower of Babel, when she destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, when she saved the children of Israel from Egyptian slavery, when she drowned the Egyptians in the Sea of Reeds, when she appeared on Mount Sinai, and when she led the children of Israel in the pillar of cloud, when she entered the sanctuary, and once more will she descend in the future in the days of the battle of Gog and Magog, a reference to the final battle between the forces of good and evil, otherwise known as the end of days.
Notice that every one of those examples that he gives are all seem to be they're the cases that we have discussed in the
Yeah.
past that all seem as though this was some type of a craft or something. coming
Yes,
down.
that's right. Right. It looks like technology. Yeah.
Mhm.
Continuing with the story of the heavenly cow, upon seeing the devastation, Ra took pity upon mankind and instructed Hathor to stop, but she refused to relent. So Ra quickly devised a plan to stop her, ordering 7,000 jars of beer, which we now know was alleged to be under the charge of Ai, to be mixed with red ochre to resemble blood, and instructed his servants to pour it out over the plains of Dendera, where she consumed it until she could no longer recognize mankind and desisted. You know what I think of? The Plain of Jars in Laos with this story. Thousands
Yeah.
of giant jars.
Mhm. I kind of drew a parallel also with Joan of Arc, because she kind of did the same thing. She went to battle under instruction, and then wouldn't stop.
Mm.
Even when the battle was won, she would not stop killing. And
Got that bloodlust.
and that was eventually her downfall, obviously. But
To commemorate the event, a temple to Hathor was constructed on the site in Dendera, where an annual feast of Hathor was observed. Interestingly, in that temple may be found depictions of the trilogy of Horus, Hathor, and Ai, the Father, Mother, and Son, or what could also be interpreted in Gnostic terms as a representation of the trimorphic Protanoia. As the story continues, Ra becomes disillusioned by the conduct of mankind and restrains himself from their complete destruction by abandoning them and riding away upon the heavenly cow. Curiously, this is very reminiscent of the following passage in the Zohar, which reads, "When the temple was destroyed by fire, the Holy One said, 'Now that I have no seat on earth, I shall remove my Shekinah from the earth and shall ascend to my first abode.' In that hour the Holy One cried and said, 'Woe to me! What did I do? I let my Shekinah dwell below for the sake of Israel, and now that they sinned, I returned to my first place. I became a laughter unto the nations and a derision to the creatures.'" In this regard, a Talmudic midrash or textual interpretation by Rabbi Akiba, written in the 2nd century CE, further explains that When the Holy One considered the deeds of the generation of Enoch, and that they were spoiled and evil, he removed himself and his Shekinah from their midst, and descended into the heights with blasts of trumpets.
I picture the scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Oh, yeah.
The craft comes down on Devil's Tower, and the first thing is you have that big trumpet blast.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I think they are also using, there were strange like trumpet sounds with the War of the Worlds, right? The noises that they had those machines make were like
true.
trumpet noises.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so returning to the Exodus story, when Miriam challenged Moses, she stated, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well?" And the Lord heard it. This elicited a swift response as Miriam suddenly felt an intense burning sensation as the Lord rebuked her directly, stating, "Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses. He is entrusted with all my house. The word Moses received was revealed to him clearly and not in dark speeches. He saw the divine presence from behind when it passed by him. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against a man like Moses, who is moreover my servant? Your censure is directed at me, or to me, rather than to him. For the receiver is no better than the thief. And if Moses is not worthy of his calling, I, his master, deserve censure." It is noteworthy that in this statement the Lord chose to refer to the divine presence in the third person. Likewise, it has been called into question how, in the referenced event, the all-powerful Lord was seemingly unable to protect Moses from direct exposure to the divine presence, which, as regular listeners should recall from Brothers of the Serpent episode 298, The Spookiest Story Never Told Part 3, was said to be the terror-inducing angel Sandalphon. However, to the Hebrews, the divine presence was a reference to the Shekinah, the female aspect of God, otherwise known as the maternal war department. Sandalphon was the one that was like, is this the one that was described as the huge rings with all the eyes? Yeah.
Yep. That's Sandalphon is the angel.
Right. Angel machine thing. Yeah.
Right. That Ezekiel encountered as well.
Yeah.
And Enoch was terrified. Remember, he was confronted.
Be not afraid.
Well, actually, even the other angels were afraid of it.
Yeah.
They said, "We can't protect you from that thing."
Right. Yeah. There's great memes about that. Be not afraid.
Yeah.
And the guy's like, "I've never been more terrified in my entire life." It's like, be not afraid.
Yeah. It's all these eyes everywhere.
Yeah. Wings and eyes and circles and rings.
Notice that in the armies that the Shekinah was supposed to, be in control of. I think it actually mentions that the Lord it was lords of many of the supernal forces, lords of eyes, lords of weapons, lords of lamentations.
Yeah.
So that may be a reference to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like the eyes part might be a separate aspect of it. It's sort of conflated as one thing.
Yeah. All right, one more break.
Yep.
I think we're actually going to do it.
We might do it.
We're gonna finish this document on this episode.
Well, god dang. We'll be right back. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. The final segment. And I think, or Russ thinks, we're actually going to get this thing done. I don't think so. It's not happening. We're going long.
But I have faith.
It might go a little long, but we're going to get it done in this episode.
That's what we always think, and then it's like the last segment is an hour long. All right, so shh. Go.
But how many more parts in this spookiest story never told are there going to be?
Oh yeah, no, we're quite a few more.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were the Shekinah is the female aspect of God, otherwise known as the maternal war department. Curiously, resulting from this confrontation, Miriam was struck with leprosy, and her skin was said to have turned pure white, a condition also associated with radiation exposure, such as that suffered by Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum, resulting from their close encounter with a diamond-shaped craft near Hoffman, Texas, on December 29th, 1980, which they initially interpreted as the second coming of Christ. However, Moses and Aaron prayed for Miriam's forgiveness, and she recovered 7 days later. This too is consistent with what we are told of Moses when in the presence of the Lord in Exodus 34:29, which states, "When Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and all the Israelites saw Moses, his face was radiant, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called to them, so Aaron and all the leaders of the community came back to him, and he spoke to them. Afterward, all the Israelites came near him, and he gave them all the commandments of the Lord had given him on Mount Sinai. When Moses finished speaking to them, he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak to him, he removed the veil until he came out."
Notice, like in this depiction, that where Moses would communicate with the cloud or whatever, with the pillar of cloud that would come down, it's walled off.
Yeah.
And also from the previous episode, remember when Tamarcus met with Trophonius, they said that when he returned, he had a radiant countenance. So kind of the same thing. For some reason, they're changed by this exposure to whatever this thing is.
Yeah. And we were mentioning in the break that the apostles seem to say this about themselves too. It doesn't necessarily say their face is radiant, but they did say that, like, we can't just go out, like, people can look at us and tell
them immediately.
Yeah.
They had been changed.
Yeah, they had been changed by their encounter.
So going back to this modern story, these people, what happened to them after they saw the craft?
They were irradiated. They got radiation poisoning, and ultimately
radiation sickness.
They had long-term effects.
But
hair
was it
falling out, blotchy skin.
So their skin did, yeah. Wow.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I had this back in the 90s. I had because I actually communicated with the main investigator of this case, and there was a lot. There was even accusations that, because it pretty much, based on the hospital reports, doctors, and everything, that it was indisputable that they had been irradiated. But there were arguments by the skeptics saying that, oh well, they must have had some type of an industrial accident, and they're trying to file a lawsuit because, and using this made up story for, like, who does
that would be the worst idea.
Oh yeah. No, I got irradiated at work, so I'm going to make up a story about a UFO that came down.
Yeah, it's
just
ridiculous.
Their experience was real. I mean, that we're getting off the subject in a way, but
that is the
case. They actually took up. The road was replaced.
Yeah,
where
it melted the road where it came over.
Yeah, they melted the road. It burned the trees on one side. That was back very close I'm going to say in the late 80s, mid 80s. There was actually an HBO special about on UFOs that actually had really good footage from this. I don't know that I've ever been able to find it again, but they actually had pictures of the trees, the burned trees, the melted asphalt, because this was done very soon after, and then after this came out, they went in and took all that out. So very clear that something happened. Now there's been debate as to what exactly.
Yeah, that might have been just a secret government craft. Was it a military?
It sounds to me like they saw It sounds to me like they saw the holy shit of holy shits.
The Shekinah.
Yeah.
Sandalphon.
Something comes down and irradiates you. Jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, they were made very sick. The road was melted. The trees were burned. And they also said they saw like a whole line of helicopters chasing this object.
Yeah.
I saw the
Chinooks,
choppers.
twin. Yeah.
What?
There was there were the Chinooks, the
No, the
big
Chinooks,
twin rotor,
the twin rotor
big
ones. Oh, they weren't the classic black helicopter things?
No. Those
Okay.
were clearly military transport.
Yeah, okay.
helicopters.
Well,
Okay.
they still could have been chasing it, but anyways.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's see, where was I at here? Okay, so you
This
removed the
is-
veil. Yeah. So another interesting related detail may be found in Exodus 33:4, which appears to warn the Israelites of not wearing jewelry in the presence of the Lord, stating, "For the Lord had said to Moses, tell the Israelites, you are a stiff-necked people," Hebrew nomenclature for stubborn. "If I were to go with you even for a moment, I might destroy you. Now take off your ornaments and I will decide what to do with you." So the Israelites just stripped off their ornaments at Mount Horeb. This is eerily reminiscent of instructions conveyed to UFO cults of the modern era, such as the Seekers, led by Dorothy Martin, discussed in episode 238, Revelations, who were directed to remove all metal from their bodies, including zippers and bra underwires, in preparation for their rescue by the Guardians aboard their flying saucers. Adding yet even more intrigue to the Lord's statement in Exodus, we have the following quote by I in the coffin text. "I am watchful for the dangerous ones, the stiff-necked, who guard the sandal of raw bark. Down on your faces, fear and tremble at me." This too appears to be a reference to the inherent danger involved in encountering Sandalphon. The other thing about metal, which we've probably brought up before, is like, the Fae were famous. They didn't like metal either. You
I'm
weren't
just
supposed to
thinking-
bring any metal in any encounters with
Good
the Fae.
point.
I'm thinking about it more in a nuts and bolts thing, but I mean, obviously, if there's serious electromagnetic fields going on,
Yeah, or
then you
any
wouldn't want to
fields,
be
yeah.
wearing any
Right.
metals
Yeah.
because they
Exactly.
could.
Yeah, what are you told when you go to get a CAT scan?
Yeah, MRI.
Remove all jewelry.
Mhm.
Yeah, or MRI. Yeah.
Sneak that ring in there with me.
We close at night.
So as a result of Miriam's resolve, the book of Aaron states, "Miriam from hence became the admired of the Hebrews. Every tongue sang of her praise. She taught Israel. She tutored the children of Jacob, and the people called her, by way of eminence, the teacher. She studied the good of the nation, and Aaron and the people hearkened unto her. To her the people bowed. To her the afflicted came." And with that, we finally come full circle to the beginning of our discussion concerning the curious inscriptions discovered by Petrie. According to Maury, or Rabbi Michael Shlomo Baron, a publishing Torah scholar who is in the top 1% of views on Academia EDU, in his published paper, The Exodus Inscriptions at Serabit el-Kadim, he concludes that the 5 inscriptions in question were not only composed by Moses, but were stern warnings to those who would dare follow Hathor, a.k.a. Baalat.
Wow.
For example, one reads, "Pitch, devastation, leprous swelling are hers with no daylight. Clear away this false goddess, O female travelers. This false goddess is shameful. Remove yourselves from Baalat. Then be ashamed of the very name of Baalat." This appears to be consistent with the law of Moses found in Exodus 23:13, which states, "And in all things that I have said unto you, take ye heed, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of thy mouth." But none were more demonstrative of his true feelings than that found in inscription 375a, which reads in part, "Those who served Baalat deserved to die." Interestingly, however, as the Israelites continued their 40-year journey across the desert, they spent 19 of those years in Kadesh Barnea, the location where Miriam died. It was written, "The children of Israel mourned for Miriam for 40 days. Neither did any man go forth of his dwelling, and the lamentation was great, for after Miriam arose up no one like unto her, and the flame thereof went out into all the lands, yea, throughout all of Canaan, and the nations feared greatly." Furthermore, the Israelites eventually made their way to the copper mines at Timnah in the Edomite Araba, where there too was located a temple to Hathor, which later became a tented shrine. In this respect, it is noted that there was an obvious anti-Hathor practice on the part of the builders of the tented shrine, displayed through the defacing of Hathor carvings, a practice that is also quite evident at Dendera. Despite
you notice? I mean, you noticed that?
Yes,
when we were there?
almost every single face is defaced. Yeah,
Yeah, and I find it interesting too that, and I mentioned, like, you have to start thinking about this, that it would appear that, you're talking about an awfully large desert. It would appear that Moses knew that the temple at Serbet El Kadim was there, right? I think it's a fairly safe assumption. It would be pretty hard to miss, especially if the mountain was glowing in fire and all. Or just it's starting to explain some of the things that are said, right? And then they go from that one where they're smelting to another one with a temple to Hathor where they're also smelting, and they were clearly they were anti-Hathor, like. So, in effect, what I'm saying is that there were two different factions here. There was Moses following Yahweh and Miriam following Hathor, and they were at odds with each other.
yeah,
And some of the things that are attributed, much in the future, have become attributed to Moses or Yahweh, are now in question. That was it really Miriam and Hathor,
yeah,
or the Shekinah, right? There are some things going on there, something more than what the story. I'm always like, I find it odd to me. I always, and when I'm doing this research, the red flags for me are usually the term I use is deceit by omission. When you're holding back relevant information, it's like a red flag. Like, why are you not stating this? Right?
Kyle's accusing you.
I'm not holding. I mean, I'm revealing it. It just takes time. In other words, all in due time. But this is, thousands of years that these stories have existed, and yet this part is left out. A lot of this stuff is left. I mean, have you ever heard of Serbet El Kadim?
No.
Neither had I.
I wonder if we can.
And it's obviously for Petrie to say that he considered it the most important finding. It means he held this in very high regard, and yet it's relatively unknown.
Yeah. Well,
we need to go there.
I think you're right. There is yes, we need to go there, but it does like at least in these ancient texts, if there was some kind of conflict between the followers of Hathor and the followers of Yahweh, a conflict that may have been that seems to have, like, at least according to these texts, it came from these entities themselves. That's where the source of the conflict is, right? That's why the followers were in conflict with each other. Well, it looks like Yahweh won, because everywhere you find
history
Hathor,
is written by the history is won by the victors,
right? And so she's basically just erased from the stories, right?
And what is Hathor? What's one of her titles? The hidden one.
The hidden one, yeah. Well, I mean.
And the temple was buried for 3,000 years.
Right. But then you want, this one, Dendera, is, I guess it could be a lot of reconstruction. I don't know what the state of it was when they first found it, but it was destroyed. And when you go there, it's interesting because the guides will say, oh, well, maybe because she was also the goddess of destruction, and there might have been, like a destructive point in Egypt. And so they were like defacing her statues because they were blaming this destruction that happened to them on her. In other words, they're blaming it on some kind of regional climate catastrophe.
This, subtly is playing is another piece in the puzzle that has unfolded over the past 14, 13 episodes, where there appears to be manipulation involved, that whatever these other intelligences or intelligence is, appears to be manipulating the people that it, it appears to, or these encounters. Sometimes the people are led to believe one thing that's really something else. I mean, some of it could be mistranslation through time, or like the telephone game, like you say, there are pieces that are left out or not recalled properly and all, but it seems as though there is a consistent, intervention that's not always accurate. It's not always truthful.
Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going here. Despite concerted efforts by religious patriarchies for nearly 3 millennia to suppress belief in the existence of a divine feminine, veneration of the Lady persisted as she continued to reveal her presence to select individuals all around the world under many guises. In 1836, a 9-year-old child named Ellen Harmon was injured when she was struck in the face by an errant stone. Soon after this accident, she began experiencing prophetic visions, which she described as suddenly being surrounded by light, accompanied by the sensation of rising higher and higher from the earth, at which point an angel would appear and convey to her mental images of historical and future events, both on Earth and on other planets. The central thrust of the communications was the existence of an ages-long cosmic battle between the forces of good and evil, between the forces of good and evil angels being waged in the heavens and on Earth. Following these experiences, she would be left with a feeling of isolation and the desire to return to that better world where she was taken. Fearing that she would not be believed, she chose to keep the experiences private for several years until one day, as she stated, "While praying, the thick darkness that had enveloped me was scattered. A bright light, like a ball of fire, came towards me, and as it fell upon me, my strength was taken away. I seemed to be in the presence of Jesus and the angels. Again it was repeated, 'Make known to others what I have revealed to you.' As so compelled, she was eventually convinced to speak publicly of her experiences, which drew the attention of religious leaders, some of whom personally witnessed many of her ecstatic episodes. They described that upon entering that state, her head would tilt back as she gazed intently upward, and would not breathe or blink for up to 3 hours, which is very reminiscent of the children of Fatima, but predates them by nearly a century. This was documented to have been validated by several physicians who monitored and observed no change in her heart rate or countenance. It was also observed that the 80-pound woman would transform from a state of physical weakness and suddenly exhibit feats of superhuman strength. Ellen would go on to become a prolific author of over 5,000 articles and 40 books on the subjects of religion, prophecy, and theology, as well as health, agriculture, and vegetarianism. One of her books was titled The Great Controversy, in which she details God's sovereignty over the universe and the war that began following the rebellion of a self-exalted being and his minions who created a distortion of the image of God in mankind, causing disorder of the created world, and how Earth was but a battlefield in a broader universal conflict.
Just note that this was more than 100 years before the discovery of the Nag Hammadi text. So they were not aware of that story being. I mean, obviously there may be variations of it.
Yeah.
Not direct.
Right. Ellen Harmon White was instrumental in the formation of what became known as the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and the Smithsonian Institution named her one of the 100 most significant Americans of all time. In 1929, a Bulgarian immigrant and Sunday school teacher named Victor Houteff completed his doctoral studies of the Book of Revelations and, convinced of an imminent apocalypse, established a branch of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on a compound in Texas he named Mount Carmel Center, a reference to the showdown between Yahweh and Baal, and he named the branch the Shepherd's Rod, a reference to the staff carried by Moses. Houteff was considered by many to be a prophet, and when he passed away in 1955, his wife Florence took over the association. 4 years later, in April 1959, she announced that she had received information that on the day of Passover, April 22nd, 1959, a war would break out in the Middle East which would coincide with the resurrection of her husband Victor and would mark the beginning of the second coming. She instructed followers to sell their homes, businesses, and farms, as well as all their earthly possessions, and assemble at their compound at Mount Carmel, a directive which unfortunately many followed. Nearly 1,000 people assembled there, and as with Dorothy Martin and the Seekers 5 years earlier, this prophecy also failed. As a result, Florence was ousted, but the person from which she had received the prophecy, a gentleman named Benjamin Roden, assumed control of the branch. So this guy gave her the prophecy? Oh my
and
God.
she took the fall. It failed, but she took the fall and he took over.
Wow. Roden obsessively studied the book of Ezekiel and wrote of the living creatures Ezekiel observed aboard the Merkaba, which Roden described as God's traveling throne. Roden wrote that the living creatures were six-winged seraphim, and that Ellen Harmon White's visions marked the beginning of the fulfillment of Ezekiel's prophecy of the reaping of earth by the Son of Man, seated upon a cloud wearing a golden crown and holding a sharp sickle. Benjamin Roden's wife Lois then also began experiencing visions of what she described as a silver angel shimmering in the night, which was a feminine representation of an angel. As a result, she proclaimed that the Holy Spirit was in fact the divine feminine, God's presence, the Shekinah. She later explained, the Godhead is represented as both masculine and feminine according to the creation story of Genesis. And she prophesied that the coming of the Savior of all mankind would arrive in female form. Lewis Roden went on to publish a magazine titled Shekinah, in which she focused primarily on the importance of women's roles within organized religion. As a postscript, after Benjamin Roden's death, Lois assumed leadership of the branch until, at the age of 67, she entered into an affair with a 24-year-old member of the church named Vernon Howell, who believed that their union would produce the chosen one. In his elevated role, Howell began a doctrine that he called the serpent's root, which was based on Isaiah 14:29, which states, "Rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent." This is interpreted as a warning by Isaiah to the Philistines, advising them not to celebrate prematurely and alerting them of a looming new threat in the ongoing battle between good and evil. Understandably, a rift grew between the heir apparent, Roden's sons George, and Howell. Following Lois's death, a dramatic power struggle ensued, and Howell ultimately prevailed as the leader of the branch in 1988. By this point, believing that he was a spiritual descendant of King David, Vernon Howell changed his first name to David, and considering himself a Messiah, assumed the name of Liberator of the Jews from the Babylonians, Cyrus the Great, whose name translated into Hebrew is Koresh. As you have probably already deduced, this story culminated 5 years later in an infamous 51-day standoff at Mount Carmel Center outside Waco, Texas, between FBI agents and David Koresh's Branch Davidians, which resulted in his death along with that of 4 federal agents, 2 local residents, and 80 of Koresh's followers.
Man. History repeating itself.
Yeah, it's
just seems like it happens over and over again.
So as we approach the end of this episode, allow us again to return to the mysteries surrounding the temple atop Serabit el-Qadim, and more specifically this time with a focus on the nature of the vast quantity of mysterious white powder discovered there by Flinders Petrie, as well as the activities which may have been involved. In his books Genesis of the Grail Kings and Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark, author Lawrence Gardner dives deeply into these questions and speculates about references in dozens of inscriptions found in the temple to an enigmatic substance and innumerable inscribed references to bread and the traditional ayin hieroglyph in the shape of an eye representing self-illumination. After providing a lengthy explanation of his investigation, Gardner concludes that what Petrie had actually found was the alchemical workshop of Akhenaten and the pharaohs before him, a temple laboratory where the furnace would have roared and smoked in the production of the enigmatic white powder, which the temple priests called something.
Called Wait, where are you?
Do you know how to say this? MFKZT? There's no vowels in it.
Mufkuts.
Okay, Mufkuts.
Yeah. There's no vowels, but it's Mufkuts.
The ancient Mesopotamians called it Shem Anah, while the Alexandrians venerated it as a gift from paradise, and later chemists such as Nicholas Flamel called it the philosopher's stone. At all stages of its history, the sacred powder of projection was reckoned to have extraordinary powers of levitation, transmutation, and teleportation. It was said to produce brilliant light and deadly rays, while at the same time being a key to active physical longevity. In Lost Secrets of the Sacred Ark, Gardner explains that the earliest historical record of Mufkut's powder appears in a very specific guise in the Egyptian pyramid texts, sacred writings which adorn the 5th dynasty pyramid tomb of King Unas at Saqqara. Here is described the locality in which the king is said to live forever and with the gods, and it is called the Field of Mufkuts, an ethereal location associated with an otherworldly dimension called the Field of the Blessed. Garner further explains that Mufkuts was produced through an alchemical process whereby gold was burned and transmuted into a higher form. He states, in alchemical tradition and practice, the philosopher's stone is said to be that which transmutes base metal into gold. This is deemed to be the case both in the metallurgical sense and in the spiritual sense of high enlightenment. There are, in fact, 2 contrasting forms of physical gold, the straightforward metal as we know it, and a much higher or highward state of gold. The latter is gold in a different dimension of perceived matter, the white powder of gold, the hidden manna, whose secret was known only by the master craftsman. It was at Karnak, where Pharaoh Tutmosis III founded his metallurgical fraternity of master craftsmen, the mystery schools, with 39 members on the High Council. They were called the Great White Brotherhood, a name which, it was said, derived from their preoccupation with the mysterious white powder of projection. The Great White Brotherhood has been described as a secret organization of enlightened mystics who guided the spiritual development of the human race, also referred to as the Council of Light by Karl von Echterhausen in Echterhausen in the late 1700s, the Ascended Masters by Helena Blavatsky in the late 1800s. Garner wrote that among other uses, the white powder was baked into cakes, noting, as far back as 2180 BCE, the pharaohs were using shefa food to enhance their pineal activity and thereby to heighten their perception, awareness, and intuition. But only the metallurgical adepts of the mystery schools, the master craftsmen, knew the secret of its manufacture. As formerly related, the overall process of rejuvenation was conducted through a program of 33 degrees, and, to facilitate the process, the Hermetic philosophers taught initiates how to prepare a miraculous powder of projection by which it was possible to transmute the base human ignorance into an ingot of spiritual gold. In the book Ages in Chaos, published in 1952, Immanuel Velikovsky also discusses Egyptian shewbread, noting its apparent unusual composition. He wrote, "Next to the altar was the table whereupon the shewbread was. The shewbread was obviously not of flour, but of silver or gold. In the book of Exodus 12, it is said that shewbread was made by Bezaleel, who was a goldsmith credited for creating the Ark of the Covenant. Shewbread is pictured on the bas-relief of Karnak in the form of a cone. The cone in the 7th row, 138, bears the explanation, white bread." Yeah, I've seen tons of those in Egypt, them holding these 2 cones.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that this was a reference to bread. That's interesting.
Yeah, they're conical bread cakes.
Yeah. It should also be noted that in the book of Exodus, it is stated that Moses took the golden calf that the Israelites had made and burnt it in the fire and ground it into a powder and strawed it upon the water and made the children of Israel drink it. This statement is rather perplexing, as burning gold through known processes does not produce a powder. Be that as it may, this act was ritualized as the Para Aduma, or red heifer or cow ritual, and is said to be one of the most mysterious described in the Torah. Interestingly, its purpose was to purify people from the defilement resulting from contact with the dead. Garner further explained that Shefa food was always depicted as a conical bread cake, also referred to as the bread of the presence. It was used to feed the light body as against the physical body, and the light body was deemed to be the consciousness. He goes on to state, all of this is mixed and mingled with accounts of fire on the mountain and the express importance of the Ark of the Covenant, the golden coffer which sent out deadly spears of lightning from between the wings of the cherubim, which surmounted its lid. In keeping with the bread of the presence, these bolts of arc light were similarly referred to as the presence. As noted previously, the presence was typically a reference associated with the Shekinah marionette. He then explains the...
Marionette.
It's marionette.
Marionette.
Yeah.
Marionette. Yeah.
He then explains the ultimate purpose of the conical shewbread, stating, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the bread of the presence is associated with the pharaoh who seeks the terminal enlightenment, or, as the Greeks called it, gnosis. As against the physical body, one was also reckoned to have a light body, which similarly had to be fed so as to be nurtured and to grow. The light body was called the Ka, and although essentially an intangible feature of life, it was said to remain active in the afterlife. The food of the Ka was light, which generated enlightenment, and the generative substance of light was the Mivskit white powder, the key to terminal enlightenment, or gnosis. Symbolically, in the Egyptian religion, upon death, judgment took place in the Duat, the underworld, presided over by Anubis. The Ka, represented by a heart, was placed on a scale opposite that of a feather, representing Ma'at, the daughter of Hathor, who represented truth and justice. If the Ka was lighter than the feather, it was allowed to continue its journey to the field of reeds, or paradise. But if it was heavier, it was consumed by Amut, the crocodile-faced lioness hippo, known as the devourer of souls. Petrie's discovery at Serabet al-Qadim is an interesting rabbit hole eminently worthy of future discussion. But, in conclusion, it is worth noting that in Researches in Sinai, he summarizes these discoveries by conveying a similar sentiment to that offered by Thomas Aquinas, discussed previously regarding the actions of demons. He wrote, "Great confusion of thought has resulted from the use of two words, miracle and supernatural, and the meanings of these words have been so twisted that false standards of thought have arisen. We must remember that a miracle is a thing wondered at, without any reference necessarily to non-natural action. Everything we admire is literally a miracle. In the good old words, anything unusual was taken to be a sign and a wonder, a thing which was viewed as a token of interposition in human affairs, and therefore a matter of astonishment." In light of the preceding lengthy journey, we will leave you with these final words for further contemplation. At the end of the Apocryphon of John, John asked the apparition, "What becomes of those who have not reached gnosis?" and received the following response, which may provide us with an answer to our yet unanswered question. The apparition stated, "After their souls have come forth from their bodies, they are delivered into the hands of the rulers, the archons, who exist because of the first ruler, Yaldabaoth. The rulers shackle such souls with chains and throw them into another fleshy prison. The rulers push them through endless repetitions of this cycle until the soul wakes up from the sleep of forgetfulness and obtains gnosis. It thereby becomes perfect and attains salvation. Thus, the soul finally escapes the prison of material existence. Until next time." Yeah.
Wow.
You
So
gotta read
they,
the last part.
yeah.
What's that?
You got to read the bottom. There's still something else.
Oh, you got a
Yeah.
definition down here? Matter. Noun. The subject of a mental act, a course of thought or speech, from Old and Anglo-French matere, or matiere, mater, subject, theme, substance, or character, and directly from Latin mater, origin, source, or mother.
Yeah. Mother.
Mother.
Matter. That's good. That's good. I like that.
Mater familia.
Subject of a mental act, the course of thought or speech. You have to refer back to the beginning of this and see how relevant that is to what was read.
Wait, with
So if
the
you go back to the Apocryphal of John, what does
okay.
it say? What is Barbello?
Ooh, man, let me
Jeez.
find
Speech.
speech. Yeah, the word.
And it was a mental act that created the physical universe.
Right.
And the definition of matter comes from, or
Is-
matter is derived from mother. I thought that was quite
That is cool.
Yeah, so
pretty cool.
right. So the description of the universe is a thought that created it, and then the word matter, which the universe is made of, matter plus all the energies or whatever, is a thought from the mother.
Yeah.
That is pretty
That is
cool.
cool. At the end there, I was kind of thinking they went from cactus fruit to cocaine.
There are a lot of little
For a while
subtle
there, it
things
was
in all
like
of
we're going out and we're
Right.
tripping in the desert, we're sleeping and we're having dreams,
And
and,
now
then
we
later
just
they were
have,
like white
piles
powder,
of powder.
piles and piles of white powder,
hundreds of tons.
and then everything got real weird.
Yeah.
And they used it to communicate
Right.
with
Yeah.
the other wolf.
Yeah.
Man.
I think that's quite a
Hookers
mystery.
and blow.
No, that is.
Yeah.
No, that
There
was,
are a lot of little subtleties in this that I found. I mean, and they're like so subtle. Like I don't expect people to get. I recognize that this episode was really in the weeds more than even usual. But
well, I mean,
I don't
I
know.
said
I
this
like
before.
the
the.
Egyptian stuff is like right up our alley.
Hell
so,
yeah.
yeah.
yeah,
It was cool.
But I recognize that, your listeners are not the average person. They're deep thinkers, right? So these things probably resonate with them a little more. They're gonna read into it a little more than the average person that wants to hear about grays and reptilians and things like that.
Yeah.
Because these things might be, in my opinion, might be more fundamental to understanding this, right? Again, if this is all metaphor, right? If all of this is kind of giving us an overview, like a historical overview, and that's why I ended this on more recent events, like actually, the Branch Davidians and all, because again, that was like a repeat of history that we heard about many times that we heard about this, particularly in Revelations, right? In the episode of Revelations. I'll give you, I don't often give you my opinion on things, but I will say what I draw from this is if there's any validity to any of this, I think that it suggests that in the context of this episode and the content of this episode, there exists this ineffable thing that we label as God, right? It's part of everything, or should I say everything is part of it. And all of these things that we call God are gods, because remember, the real God, whatever it is not, according to this, was not. It's beyond. It was above. These gods that seem to like to toy with mankind. For one, there appears to be a plurality of these things. It's not one or two. It could be many. And they seem to have different agendas, or they may, and like it said that they might work against you or quarrel with each other, but they never dispute that each other exists. That those type of things kind of resonate. Like if you look at the overall, right, this pattern that we're seeing of this chaotic picture, a lot of times it looks nonsensical or chaotic because you're lumping it all into one thing. Like why do they do this and then they do something completely different? It doesn't make any sense, right? Well, that's because you're maybe conflating things that shouldn't be conflated. Maybe they're
Well, yeah, but
opposing parties or opposing agendas.
that's what's been done with the stories. I mean, a lot of the actions like of one particular god in another story are multiple different gods all acting. And then like another story, somebody just took all of those different actions of different quote unquote lowercase g gods and put them all together and said it was one of them that did it. And they seem to be working against themselves, but it's actually multiple different entities or whatever you would call them, lowercase g gods.
Like you could use these, like, again, I recognize we're using labels here, but
well, you take
these could be quote unquote aliens. In other words, their intelligence is from other realms, maybe physical, maybe some non-physical. There could be different types, in that chain of being that where there are some material and immaterial intelligences in this hierarchy, right? Some may interact with us in physical ways, some may interact with us in in mental, influence. Or this could be just like a massive chessboard of, a three-dimensional chessboard where pieces are being moved in ways that are so chaotic from our perspective that they're not understandable in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
But there may be something going, in other words, there may be a legitimate conflict there.
The interesting thing about the fact that this is such ancient history, like these stories are coming down to us from thousands of years ago, and it's not something in modern times that somebody else could
Fake news.
That could make news that somebody else could then come up with a story that's similar to quote unquote corroborate it and be, being untruthful. These stories come down to us from different time periods over long periods of time from different places. And they seem to be telling the same story or general same ideas, but there's like different names involved and a different number of people, or this action was attributed to somebody else. It's just really strange. It's like they corroborate each other, or they are the same story being told in different ways and just being like the game of telephone, like you had mentioned before.
They get
following that train of thought.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Following that train of thought. Imagine if like, because there's another potentiality, right? If you take stories like we've talked about a few of the different UFO cults that ultimately end in their demise, right? And then you take like this latest one, in 2,000 years from now, and they're retelling their story. They're going, oh no, they're just conflating. They're just using different names for the same scenario where all these people believed in this thing and they all went to their death because of this belief. Like maybe they weren't the same. There was history repeating itself. The party or the intelligence doing the manipulating is just pulling the same tricks on different people.
Yeah.
And it's under different guises. They're following it under a different name, but these things may have been different events. It's just a repetition of
or that those people were primed to become victims of that type of story because they had grown up in a world that was like, this is all real. So now they're seeing it happening again, and they're like, this is the second coming. We've been told by the ancients it'll happen again.
Right. Yeah. And now in modern cases, it's like, these are the aliens and they're coming to save us, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that's our modern interpretation, our technological interpretation of the same exact thing.
It's hard. It's hard to figure out what it is. Are we primed as a modern civilization just because we've inherited all these stories to relate to them in some way when they happen in modern times and we feel special? Like, wow, we're in the end times. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. We're in the end times. And it's like people, exactly. I think, I don't know that it's like a brand new phenomenon that's saying, hey, like, let's go manipulate these people, history repeating itself. Or is history repeating itself because we have inherited all these stories? Like if 100 years ago, everything, all of the written works and all of the stuff had been completely wiped out, and we were just a brand new human race that had no history at all, would these things work? Would you be able to lure people and make them all kill themselves for some...
Oh, you mean if these
second coming
ideas
idea.
weren't deeply set
That's
in
what
the
I'm
cultures?
saying.
Yeah.
They're so deeply ingrained in the culture that it's like, that's what I mean by we're primed. There's just people that are just primed to believe that they might happen to be witnessing the second coming.
So to make
and
to make like a crappy programming analogy, like the program has been written a long time ago, and every once in a while something shows up and like executes it
yeah.
on a group of people,
Yeah.
and they do it again
Right.
and again and again, and it's slightly different each time, but it's like this whole spiral, right? It's not a circle, but you can see it goes around and around and around. Each time it's slightly different, but it's basically the same thing happening over and over again.
So it could
within
be
the
both.
context of its modern.
I hear what you're saying. It could be that the program is being executed again and again, and it also could be sometimes that just randos, like fanaticals, just get shit going.
But I find it fascinating that, like, you know, if you go all the way back to this Gnostic stuff from the Nag Hammadi text, right? That wisdom, Sophia, starts all this bullshit by creating this Yaldabaoth, like, Lovecraftian outer god thing. And then she hides him in the clouds, right? You can already see how this is connected.
Yeah.
Hides him in the clouds. Then he makes the archons. So if you take all this stuff as like, this is basically an accurate or like a worthwhile depiction of what was going on, then most of the entities that people encounter in the crafts, and maybe the crafts themselves, are like archon encounters. You know, Yaldabaoth is like the one pulling the strings, and all this comes about from Sophia, wisdom. But it's like this weird hidden thing, right? And what does he want to do?
This is where you get the whole thing of like, don't seek knowledge.
Right. Yeah. But what does he want to do?
Because often it comes and tricks you into thinking you've learned everything.
Yeah, and then the whole demiurge thing,
destroyed.
like he creates the material universe, and then all he wants to do afterwards is destroy it.
Yeah.
And he over and over.
This is funny because
He's trying to destroy
You
it.
said several things that like resonate with me because he wants to exert power.
Yeah.
Right? He needs something to rule over. He creates something to rule over.
Yeah.
And it's like this was recently stated on the Discord, and the adage, money is a root to all evil, came up, and I said, money is a tool. Money is a lever. Money is about power. People want to rule. They want to control. It's not the money. If it was, or you could use, if we were trading coconuts, it would be coconuts are the root to all evil. It's the lever, right? And then going back further, which I thought was brilliant, you brought up this computer analogy, right, to what's going on in this system repeating itself. That's actually illustrates my point, that I would venture to bet that 100 years from now, looking back on this, I'll be saying that, and because we're at that point where we're evolving, we were this nutsy boltsy technological age, and now we're turning into this virtual age, right? And increasingly now they're saying, oh, well, are we encountering AI?
We're about to do the same thing.
AI is the new airships.
Yeah.
And the new flaming shields.
But we're about to be the
right.
guy who created something that is then spending the rest of his existence trying to destroy it.
Right. So 2000, assuming we survive our own advancements, 2,000, 3,000 years from now, how would this be interpreted?
I was about to
Creators?
I was about to make an argument that like this guy must not be very powerful. Like he created something to rule over, and then he was like, I don't like it, and then he spends thousands of years trying to destroy it, and he can't.
He's trying to destroy Adam, right? That's the Like,
But we're about to do that.
yeah.
I'm just saying, like,
that gets into the.
we might actually do that.
Right. Then that spills over into the Enki Enlil Unapishtim thing. In other words, it's more than one party involved. Maybe the reason that
That's what I'm saying. Somebody's out
mankind
there
wasn't destroyed
advocating
because
for mankind.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
And
not all the
notice that,
archons are on Enlil's side.
Yeah.
God,
God,
that,
Enlil, dude,
Shekinah-
such a jerk.
Notice that it said that the Shekinah argued with God. That it took up for man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of confusion. Like
Argue with
there's
Yahweh.
contradictions abound through this thing. It's like it's full of contradictions. And like I've had a lot of time, like a year or so, to digest some of this that I've been as I assemble this thing. And I'd like saying, well, which are the good guys and which are the bad guys? Because depending on which part of the story you're looking at, it's kind of flipping back and forth. And we go back to that Game of Thrones thing where Game of Deuce, or what is it?
Game of
Discs.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's
Which
the bad
is
guy.
short
Oh,
for
no,
Game
wait,
of
it's the other-
Dooskies.
Right. You never know because it's, sometimes it's a matter of perspective. You might be assigning intent based on not a full understanding of the scenario of the situation. Now, that's not to say that evil doesn't exist. I do believe there is fundamental evil, but these, it gets into this philosophical question of, is a man evil, or is evil an external thing that was introduced into mankind? Or, is a child, we've had to say, I hate to repeat myself, but a child born, in, the Amazon that's never been exposed to the outside world, is that person inherently evil, or do they have the potential to become evil? Or we don't really, these are things, a lot of it is just like, we take things for granted. These labels, we just instantly connect a thought to a word, and maybe we shouldn't so quickly jump to those things. I think that we need to analyze the scenarios and try to see the mechanism behind it. Like, is there a reason for certain things to happen the way they do? It's a complicated way to look at things, because it's virtually there's no answer. It gets exponentially more complicated.
I do like the idea of evil being akin to chaos and good being akin to order in a way, but a balance between them, right? You have to have a balance. You don't want too much order, because then you're just a bunch of sheep just doing whatever.
Yeah.
So there's a balance, and evil is when the scales are tipped more towards chaos. And I think everything is capable, like any sentient being is capable of being more chaotic than is healthy.
But
And even in Mother Nature, you can see like certain animals can behave like just incredibly chaotic. You wouldn't sit there and observe some animal behaving chaotically and say, "Look at this harmony."
But is chaos
there
a
is-
necessary component of advancement?
Absolutely, it has to be a little bit, and that's why I love that. This is one of the reasons why I love that idea, is because without a little bit of it, then you don't have things like creativity and, like Russ was saying, advancement. You have too much order. There's nothing happens. Like we look at, this whole idea in physics of entropy going from complete order to total chaos. And only somewhere in the middle do you get complex life. So it's
And even you can look at, like on a smaller scale, Earth itself. Like one of a good argument for a reason why complex life forms showed up here and then were able to evolve is because you have a mix of order and chaos. Like if you had too much order, then there would never be any geological upheavals that would open up ecological niches for new species to adapt into.
Yeah.
And thus you would just have like the dinosaurs would rule for millions of
The
years.
tides, the
Right.
moon, right? Like
Yeah.
this whole idea of like pulling the oceans and sloshing them around and all. It's just all
Yeah.
this. There's
It's
this
just enough
introduced enough chaos into
Yeah.
this ordered system.
where there can be some kind of progression and advancement.
And I
And
love
it's
that idea. And
interesting
I think it's a great analogy to, all these stories where you
This is
have
the chaos
you have the
in the order of the podcast.
you have the good and evil, quote unquote, gods, or good and evil forces always fighting against each other. One never wins. No one ever wins. The winning is always in the future, which is
I
pretty in line
I
with
wanted to-
physics and cosmology as well. Eventually,
wanted to
one
point
will
out
win.
something that because I was going to say it and we start trying to change subjects a little bit, but I think it's important to recognize because this is something that's so prevalent. That you hear it pretty often is these, the idea of the apocalypse, these apocalyptic visions and everything, and people that get all worked up about, there's going to be an apocalypse, or, and they I think they conflate cataclysm with apocalypse. 'Cause
Yeah.
apocalypse is, not
revelation.
necessarily right. It's not right. It's not necessarily destruction, but regardless, whenever you start thinking about those things, you have to recognize that there's never been a time when there wasn't, that people were not experiencing these it would appear that there was people that were receiving these messages, these visions of destruction and things like that. So, if everybody keeps predicting it, eventually, it's inevitable that dinosaurs might have predicted their own demise if they were
Yeah.
getting these type of visions. In other words, eventually, even if it takes millions of years, it's going to happen eventually, right? So, again, is that not kind of reek of manipulation, or that's a lever?
The reason the dinosaurs
if you
died
don't,
is because they never invented Democrisaurus. It was only Tyrannosauruses.
The Tyrannosaurus ruled the land with very small iron fists.
Yes.
in that conflation of names and how the names change and the stories stay the same, I thought it was pretty interesting in the coffin text that I uses Hathor and Isis and Nephthys interchangeably. The different goddesses,
Yeah.
he refers to her in different names at different times. So that's, obviously it was written by a human, right? But
Yeah.
it's odd that even 5,000 years ago, at least the coffin texts are at least 5,000 years old. They were already recognizing that these were appeared to be the same entities, falling under different names depending on the civilization they were appearing to or whatever. So, to me, there's a lot there. Like I almost find that more interesting than all of the current day stuff that you can't decide whether that was military or that's a psyop or that. In other words,
I like it.
you don't ever, I like I like looking at that big picture thing, and some of that is relevant now. There's some overlap and vice versa. Sometimes modern events can be viewed through the lens of this ancient history, right? They take on relevance, like and I obviously referred to this because there are several aspects of this that I think are important, and I was subtle in how I interjected some of this information, but like in the previous episode when we were talking about the different beings, and I mentioned that they were represented by triangles, equilateral triangle, and I put an image up for those that watched it on YouTube. There was an image of a being, an alien-looking thing with the triangle on its chest, and that's one of the beings that appeared to Chris Bledsoe. And Chris Bledsoe said that triangle represents something that's important. I found it pretty interesting that either he, made a really good guess, or he found the same obscure reference that I did from 600 years ago or more. I think it was even older than that that we're already making this connection between these beings that appeared that seem to have these representations of triangles and different types of triangles. So I thought that was pretty curious. And then also how it appears that it would seem as though this divine feminine, Hathor, Ashtoreth, or Astarte, or these apparitions have been happening for thousands of years in very similar ways, conducting themselves in very similar ways, telling very similar stories and things like that. So is this something that's innate in our human psyche, or is this a legitimate thing? Is this a legitimate thing that's happening? I don't know, but it's interesting to me that this keeps happening and that entire belief systems were built on. Obviously, at some point, it would appear that Hathor, or this divine feminine, was right up there, if not more worshipped than Yahweh or any other male deity.
Yeah.
And over time, it seems as though it has been suppressed. But Lawrence Gardner really pushes that. I toned that way down. I didn't really focus too much on that aspect, but Lawrence Gardner really pushes that there was a concerted effort to erase any references to to divine feminine, or to even to females in general, in terms of organized religion, that they've always been downplayed. Yeah, I thought that, we're starting to get into the socio-political stuff, so I tried to not make that an issue, but the suppression of the worship of Hathor, we saw that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it started a long time ago, and you're right. It's like it pushed the entire concept of the divine feminine completely out of, at least, especially the monotheistic stuff. You have the idea of the Trinity now is like Father, Son, and this Spirit. It doesn't give a gender to the Spirit, right? But this is obviously the feminine part. And it is the encounter with this Holy Spirit that the apostles have that changes them. So it's the same thing that Moses was encountering on the mountain, and Miriam is dealing with.
Other curious, like, there are a lot of weird, coincidences in this thing. And one of them is, I kind of, again, because this was all supposed to be one thing, even though it was crazy long, but whatever. I made references to Prospero and Shakespeare, using the character Ariel, and it was kind of what's the term, an Easter egg, for the people that go back and re-listen, that Ariel, it was the translation for Lion of God.
Lion of God,
El.
yeah, R-A-L.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what is Hathor in segment form?
Yeah, the Lion of God. Yeah.
Lioness, right?
Yeah.
Of God, like, wow, that's a pretty weird coincidence.
Yeah.
Have you ever looked at the Wheel of Fortune tarot card?
No. Wow. That's pretty wild.
There's the Lion of God.
And
the writing is backwards. Yeah. So it says tarot, Taro, or Ator, which is Hathor. Rota,
wow,
a wheel, or orate,
to speak.
like to speak. This is a very interesting card, bro. You should check this out.
Yes. The word. Speech.
The word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's pretty
The
cool.
other thing I would point out, just, as we close up here, we were talking about how deeply this stuff is embedded in our culture and all the way into pop culture. Like, you're talking about these entities with the triangle on their chest or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you remember the Starfleet emblem that they all wear? It's a triangle.
Yeah.
It's basically a delta, like a triangle on their chest, and they're coming down and appearing to these alien races, and they got this triangle right here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same kind of, this imagery and these concepts are deeply embedded, and they show up
Yeah.
in the strangest and interesting places. And it makes you wonder, like, do these people do their homework, or is this just so deeply embedded that this seems natural? In some cases, I think they do their homework.
I think so.
It's almost like we can't see the forest from the trees because we're so accustomed to seeing it that it doesn't even faze us. We don't even recognize the significance in maybe you have to be an overthinker.
I would love to.
Sometimes it has a connection,
I want to get some people on to talk about AI, people who are experts in this, and I think we're going to be able to do that. But
definitely happening.
One of the things I want to talk about
confirmation today.
Yeah. One of the things I want, oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I want to talk about is, can we get, like, maybe some of you have seen, like, they had some AI go through all these scientific papers or whatever, and then they shut it down because they didn't like what was the results or whatever. But can you imagine if we could build, like, I don't think that the stuff we're calling AI is at all AGI, right? It's not sentient, but it can do analysis. And, like, people have use it to do all kinds of interesting analysis, but I would love to have one that can do analysis of this kind of stuff and just see what it comes up with, because it doesn't have the cultural programming, right? It's tough for us to look at this kind of stuff.
I don't know. I might dispute that a little bit.
I would bet that it's already been done.
Probably, yeah.
I would bet that was part of offset.
I think the cultural programming might actually be unavoidable.
Look, nobody knows
No, I'm not talking about an LLM.
This obscure stuff that seems completely irrelevant to UFOs. Nobody knows this better than Jacques Vallée. And Jacques Vallée is the one that was handling the computer
analysis
stuff for OSSEC. So my guess is that's already been done. And I've heard people talk about, well, it's very difficult to have AI analyze these old documents because of the terminology and the word. And I'm like, bullshit. I know how to do it. If I can do it, AI wouldn't. It's effortless. It's not that difficult. When you start, after a while, you get a feel for the way things were referenced.
Yeah,
it's not as difficult as you would think.
Even if you just had it go through and just build some kind of visualization of the patterns across history.
Oh yeah, it's going to recognize.
It doesn't have to like tell us what's going on. I don't think it can do that, but it can say,
no.
"Oh, this is an enormous structural thing, and all these things are connected."
Yeah, it's basically going to be like, so there's this snake eating its tail. Done.
Right.
Yeah.
How many times you could pick up how many different civilizations have references to these things, and it's just a matter of data input, right?
Yeah.
I would think that doesn't seem like an overwhelming problem to me. The most complicated part is the data input. Right? Scanning the documents or, whatever.
Right.
Scrolls or carvings.
Yeah, it would be great.
It can't figure out where the guy should be holding the sword, though. That's the problem. It's like, no. Hold it from the
They've fixed
hilt
that.
part.
AI has a really hard time with hands.
Marty's just like, it's not a problem. They should be able to just analyze these texts, no big deal. And it's like, you're like, a guy with a sword.
Yeah.
And he's just holding it by the blade in the middle.
Yeah. How do I tell AI where to put the lightsaber?
You have to be very specific. I ran into that. Troy was helping me with some of the graphics and said, I put stuff in with it.
I noticed the writing at the bottom of the quoted one. It was like, wow.
Yeah.
Very interesting spelling. The early settlers would have been proud. It was spelled very strangely.
You guys seen that thing, which is like an extra finger that you can wear?
Yeah,
it's a thing you put on. It's just got an extra random finger that sticks out, so that any
people think that
you're doing a crime. You're like, that's
AI generated. Yeah. I got 7 fingers on one hand.
That's not very respectful. I take offense. I take personal offense.
All right.
Well,
dudes.
give us a thumbs up. That was a great episode, buddy.
Great episode, Marty.
Praise it.
1.5.
Yeah, 1.5 thumbs up from Marty. Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you all for listening and being patient. with everything going on. And yes, we are, like I said, taking a break for harvest. We're not taking a break. We're just having to stop podcasting until harvest is over.
Should be over in 2 weeks. No, we may actually.
Well, we have harvest and then fermentation, and until all that's done, we can't. Yeah. Last year,
we ought to be pulling the mother load of the crops within a week or two, but they're trickling in right now.
Last year, we took 6 weeks off before we came back to podcasting. Before everything was basically in tank or barrel.
I know.
Yeah.
I was ready for it, and then it rained, and it was like, oh.
Yeah, we gotta wait. Yeah.
Oh. But yeah.
So yeah, thank you all for. I have tons of emails to read. We have producers to thank, but we're gonna get to all that after we come back from harvest. So thank you all so much for listening, for supporting the show.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you, Marty. This was excellent.
Thanks.
How long is it going to take you to type the next one?
Right now, it'd be really hard. Part of it's already done, but even then, I mean,
you need to hire a typist.
Yeah. Marty needs a typist, folks. His number is 777-427-57.
telling me to use the speech to text. I'm like, if I could do that, yeah,
he would just talk during the episode.
Everything would be
AI should be able to handle that, Marty. It seems like an easy problem to solve for AI.
So I'd be holding the keyboard upside down.
Yeah.
Like the sword.
You'd have 7 thumbs.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. We love you guys.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.
Get back.